Good evening, and welcome to a night unlike any other. You've found yourself here, in the quiet hours, when the world is hushed, and shadows stretch longer than daylight ever allowed. Tonight, we will take a journey together through whispers in the dark, through moments where the ordinary twists into something unexplainable. 7 tales await you, each a thread of fear, curiosity, and quiet unease. Stories that crawl under the skin, that linger in the corners of your mind, that might make you glance at your own reflection just a little too long. So settle in, dim the lights, wrap yourself in the warmth of a blanket, let your imagination wander, and remember, listen closely, for in the quietest moments, the night itself begins to speak. Story 1. Apartment 4B. They say old apartment buildings have a way of remembering their tenants. The walls keep secrets, the pipes carry whispers, and the floors creak not because of age, but because of footsteps that should not be there anymore. When Chloe signed the lease for apartment 4B, she thought she had found a rare blessing in the heart of the city. The rent was low, suspiciously low, but as a college student trying to juggle classes and 2 part-time jobs, she wasn't going to ask too many questions. The building itself was old, yes, with peeling paint along the hallways and a faint smell of mildew that never quite left the stairwell. But the space was hers. For the first time, she had a place to call her own. The bedroom was small, just enough for her twin bed and a thrift store desk pressed against the wall. That wall, on the right side of the room, separated her from the next unit, apartment 4C. The first night, when she leaned her head against it, she could hear faint scratching, not constant, not loud, but enough to make her think a mouse might be living in there. It wasn't until the third night that she noticed the hole, a tiny puncture near the baseboard, just wider than the tip of her finger. Someone had covered it with a strip of beige tape, brittle and curling at the edges. Chloe crouched down, curious. The tape peeled away with little effort, revealing the hole. She expected to see insulation, maybe dust, maybe just darkness, but instead, she saw red. Not the dull brown red of bricks, or the muted rust of old pipes. This was vivid like wet paint, a whole field of crimson on the other side. She blinked, leaned closer. The light from her desk lamp trickled in, and the color seemed to shimmer. For a moment, she thought she was staring into a room painted entirely in scarlet. Her first thought was, what kind of person paints their whole apartment red? It was eccentric, maybe even stylish, though something about the hue made her throat feel tight. It wasn't a cheerful red. It was heavier, thicker, as if it wanted to bleed through the plaster into her own room. Chloe sat back, frowning, but the curiosity itched. The next night, she looked again. The red was still there, but darker somehow, as though the lights in the other room had dimmed. On the 5th night, it seemed brighter, glossier, like the surface of liquid rather than paint. She told herself she was imagining it, that her mind was playing tricks, the way colors shift in shadows, and yet, she kept checking. Almost every night before bed, she crouched by the wall, lifted the corner of the tape, and peered through the tiny puncture into apartment 4C. Each time the red greeted her. One rainy evening, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find the landlord, a thin man with a permanent stoop in his shoulders and eyes that never seemed to meet hers. He said in his usual clipped tone, "There's a tenant who wants to switch units with you. I'll lower your rent further if you agree." Chloe blinked. Switch? With who? Apartment 4C. Her heart skipped. But there's someone living there? The landlord's lips pressed tight. He looked past her, into the dark corners of her apartment, as though searching for something. Finally, he shook his head. Number. Not anymore. The unit can't be rented again. He started to leave, but Chloe stepped forward. Wait, what do you mean? Why not? For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he muttered almost to himself, because it's not empty. Not really. And with that, he shuffled down the hall, his footsteps fading against the cracked linoleum. That night, Chloe couldn't sleep. She kept turning the words over in her head. Not empty. Not really. By midnight, her curiosity burned hotter than her fear. She sat on the floor, staring at the strip of tape covering the hole. Her fingers trembled as she peeled it back one more time. But what she saw wasn't the endless red this time. It was an eye. A human eye, bloodshot and rimmed in crimson, staring directly back at her through the wall. Chloe jerked away, heart slamming against her ribs. The eye didn't blink. didn't move. It just watched. And then came the sound, faint at first, then unmistakable. A slow scratching, fingernails dragging across the other side of the plaster. Her breath hitched. The sound grew louder, faster, more frantic, as if whatever was inside apartment 4C was trying to claw their way through. She scrambled to her feet, slamming the tape back over the hole, pressing it down with shaking palms. Her body quivered with panic, but even as she stumbled backward, the scratching only intensified. And then, in the thinnest whisper, close enough to feel warm against her ear, came a voice from the wall. "Don't worry, little one. We're good neighbors, you and I." For the rest of that night, Chloe sat awake in bed, her desk lamp burning until dawn. The whisper still clung to her ears, echoing whenever she closed her eyes. "We're good neighbors, you and I." By morning, the apartment looked the same as always. Pale wallpaper curling at the edges, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette, the pale light spilling through the blinds. Normal, harmless. Yet, when her gaze slid toward the wall between 4B and 4C, her stomach knotted. She told herself she had dreamed it. Stress, exhaustion, maybe even the leftover effects of the cheap wine she'd had before bed. Anything would be better than believing someone or something had whispered through the plaster. That day at campus, she kept catching herself staring at people's eyes. In the cafeteria, in the library, even during lectures. She remembered the one she had seen through the wall. Bloodshot, rimmed with red, unblinking. Every glance she met seemed too sharp, too prolonged. She avoided mirrors. That evening, when she returned to the apartment, she paused outside the door to 4C. The number was still nailed crookedly to the frame, the brass tarnished and dull. No noise came from inside, no hint of movement. Chloe leaned closer. The wood smelled faintly sour, like old dust soaked in dampness. She wanted to knock just once, but her knuckles froze inches from the door. Instead, she whispered, "Hello?" Her voice echoed down the silent hallway. No answer. Back inside her own unit, she cooked ramen and tried to focus on the sound of boiling water, the rhythm of her spoon against the pot, but the wall kept drawing her eyes. She imagined fingers trailing against the other side, nails scraping like before. She pushed the thought away. "Don't think about it, Chloe." But that night, lying in bed, she heard it again. Soft, subtle, a faint scratching, as though a mouse or rat were gnawing at the woodwork. She pulled the blanket to her chin, heart pounding. The sound stopped. She held her breath, listening, every muscle tense. Silence, then 3 slow knocks against the wall. Deliberate, rhythmic. She sat up, her throat dry. "Hello?" she whispered, before she could stop herself. No reply. She forced herself to lie down again, convincing herself it had to be the neighbors upstairs, or maybe plumbing noises. That was all. The following day, she decided to bring it up to the landlord. She caught him in the lobby, hunched over a clipboard. "Hey," she began carefully, "about the apartment next to mine, 4C. Is there anyone living there now?" He didn't look up. "No one lives there." She frowned. "But I hear noises, scratching, knocking. Maybe animals got in? You should check." This time he raised his head, his watery eyes locking on her. "Don't open the wall. Don't touch it again." Her lips parted. "Excuse me? You covered the hole again, didn't you?" he asked. His voice was low, urgent. Her skin prickled. "How do you know about the hole?" He swallowed, his gaze darting toward the stairwell. "Just keep it sealed, for your own sake." And before she could press him further, he shuffled away, leaving her staring after him, unsettled. That night, she couldn't resist. She crouched by the wall, her fingers trembling as she peeled the tape back once more. The red glow greeted her instantly, like a drop of liquid fire pressed against her eye. But it wasn't flat this time. The color moved. It pulsed. And then there it was. Not just the red, but the faint impression of a shape behind it. A shadow crossing. A ripple, as though someone stood too close on the other side. Chloe gasped and pulled back. She sat on the floor, trembling, debating whether to leave the apartment entirely, but her curiosity anchored her. Slowly, carefully, she leaned in again. The red seemed deeper now, darker. She thought she saw texture-thin veins, branching patterns, like cracks spreading across glass. A sound followed, not scratching this time. A faint, wet blink. The eye appeared again, not fully open, but half-lidded, watching her, its sclera raw and inflamed, the iris a dull, unnatural crimson. It didn't move, didn't dart away like a startled neighbor caught peeping. It only stared, patient and knowing. Chloe staggered backward, pressing her hand to her mouth. She could feel her own heartbeat in her throat, thundering against her ribs. She slapped the tape back over the hole, this time layering it 3 times with duct tape from her desk drawer. And still, long after she crawled back into bed, she swore she could feel the weight of that eye on her, watching, waiting. And when she finally drifted into a restless sleep, she dreamed of red walls closing in around her, pulsing like lungs, whispering with every breath, "We're good neighbors, you and I." The duct tape held for 2 days. Chloe tried her best to ignore the wall, convincing herself that if she just acted like everything was normal, the noises and whispers would fade. She filled her evenings with homework, streaming shows on her laptop, blasting music through her earbuds until she fell asleep. Yet every so often, she caught herself glancing at that strip of silver tape, terrified of what might be pressing its face against the other side. On the 3rd night, she woke to the sound of something peeling, a faint rip, 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 like someone slowly tearing fabric. Her eyes shot open. The tape. She sat up in bed, frozen, listening. The sound stopped, replaced by silence so deep it roared in her ears. When she finally gathered the courage to step out of bed and switch on the lamp, the wall looked unchanged. The tape was still there, but when she pressed her hand against it, she swore it felt warm. The next morning she overslept and nearly missed her first class. Her skin was pale, her eyes bloodshot. In the bathroom mirror, she studied herself carefully, searching for signs that she was just hallucinating. Lack of sleep could explain the whispers. Stress could explain the eye. Right? She splashed cold water on her face, whispering, "Get a grip." But later that afternoon, while returning from class, she saw the landlord again. He was standing by the mailboxes, muttering under his breath while sorting envelopes. She hesitated, then approached. "Mr. Hollis," she said softly. He glanced up, startled. "Oh, you. There's something wrong with the wall," Chloe blurted. "The tape doesn't hold. I think something is trying to come through." His face went stiff. "Don't talk like that. I'm serious. I hear it at night. Knocking, peeling, and..." She swallowed hard. "There's an eye watching me." The old man's mouth tightened into a thin line. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Whatever you do, don't acknowledge it. Don't answer. Don't look again. That's how it spreads." Chloe stared at him, her stomach hollowing out. "What do you mean, spreads?" But he only shook his head, stuffing mail back into his satchel. "Some things are older than these walls. Pretend you don't see it, and maybe it'll pretend too." Then he walked away, leaving Chloe trembling in the empty hallway. That night, Chloe couldn't keep herself from checking. It wasn't bravery, it was obsession. She told herself she just needed to confirm nothing had changed, that the tape still covered the hole, that she was imagining it all. She crouched down slowly, her breath shallow. The tape was still there. She touched it lightly. The surface was damp. Her stomach turned. She leaned closer, sniffing. A sour, metallic scent clung to it, like blood left too long in the air. She recoiled, hand pressed to her mouth, before she could decide whether to fetch more tape. A faint bulge formed beneath the silver strip, pushing outward. Something was pressing from the other side. Her pulse spiked. She stumbled backward, knocking over her desk chair, and then the voice came, muffled through the wall, low and deliberate. "We missed you." The bulge receded. The tape lay flat again, as if nothing had happened. Chloe didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, she called her best friend, Mara, who lived across town. She hadn't told anyone about the hole until now, afraid of sounding insane. But the words poured out in a rush. Desperate for someone to believe her, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Mara sighed. "Chloe, you need to get out of there. Tonight. Crash at my place, okay? You're freaking yourself out in that shoebox apartment." Chloe wanted to. She wanted to pack up and never come back. But something in her resisted. A tether, invisible and stubborn, pulling her toward that wall. "I'll think about it," she said weakly. That evening she tried. She stuffed clothes into a bag, shut off the lights, and slung her keys over her shoulder. She made it as far as the stairwell before she froze. She couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened, her legs shaking as if she were about to collapse. She clutched the railing, dizzy. The thought of leaving felt impossible, like something was clawing her back toward the apartment. Panting, she stumbled upstairs again, dropped her bag, and collapsed on the couch. Trembling, she whispered to herself, "Just one more night, then I'll go." But the apartment had other plans. Near midnight, she heard it again, the peeling sound. This time it was louder, more insistent. She turned on the lamp and stared in horror as the duct tape began to curl away from the plaster, strip by strip, until the hole gaped open once more. Red light poured into the room, faint but steady, pulsing in time with her own heartbeat. Chloe pressed herself against the opposite wall, shaking. The eye appeared again, larger this time, filling the opening. Its crimson iris gleamed wetly, the veins crawling outward as though they were seeping into the plaster itself. It blinked slowly, a heavy, deliberate motion, and then the whisper, "We're closer now." Chloe screamed, grabbing the nearest object, her desk lamp, and hurling it at the wall. The bulb shattered, sparks flying. The wall shuddered, and for a moment the eye seemed to retreat. But when the smoke cleared, the hole remained, open and waiting, the red glow brighter than ever. Her phone buzzed suddenly on the floor. She snatched it up. It was Mara, texting, "On my way. Don't do anything. Just stay put." Chloe typed back with trembling fingers, "It's already here." Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. And then, from the wall came the sound of a second eye opening. The apartment was no longer silent. The wall itself seemed to breathe. Chloe crouched in the corner of her bedroom, clutching her phone like a lifeline. The message from Mara glowed on the screen, "On my way." It should have given her hope, but instead it felt like a countdown. Could Mara even make it here in time? And if she did, what would she find? The sound of peeling tape had stopped. There was nothing left to peel. The hole was fully open now, a wound in the plaster, raw and hungry. Two eyes stared through it, both crimson, both unblinking. They didn't shift or glance around like human eyes would. They fixed directly on her, as if they had been waiting, as if she had always been the only thing to see. Chloe couldn't move. Her hands trembled violently, her breath ragged, shallow. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. The tether she had felt before pulling her back into the apartment was stronger than ever. It felt like invisible wires wound through her muscles, locking her in place. Then came the scratching. It started softly, like fingernails grazing drywall, a tentative scrape, as though testing the barrier between them. Then harder, louder, until it sounded like claws raking at the inside of the wall. Dust trickled from the plaster. The red glow pulsed brighter. Chloe forced herself to shout, her voice shaking. "Stop it! Stop!" The scratching ceased. The eyes blinked slow, deliberate. And then the whisper came again, clearer now, sliding through the wall like smoke. "You opened the door. We can come through." Her stomach dropped. I didn't open anything. You looked. You listened. That's all it takes." Her heart hammered. She pressed herself further into the corner, digging her nails into the floorboards. "What do you want from me?" The voice chuckled softly, like gravel rolling across tile. "We want what's always been promised. A place beside you. A room of our own." The scratching resumed, faster now, almost frantic. The drywall split with a hairline crack that crawled outward from the hole, like a spider web. A thin black liquid seeped from it, dripping down the wall, leaving a sticky trail that smelled of rust and damp earth. Chloe gagged. She staggered to her feet, nearly slipping as the liquid spread across the floor. Her phone buzzed again. Mara was calling this time. Hands shaking, Chloe answered. "Mara, please." "Chloe, I'm outside. Your building looks dark. None of the hallway lights are on." "Which floor?" "Fourth," Chloe whispered hoarsely. She dared a glance back at the wall. The crack widened with a sickening pop, and a sliver of movement showed inside, something shifting just beyond the plaster. Pressing forward. "Please hurry. I'm coming up, just hold on." The line went dead. The scratching grew louder, furious, like dozens of hands clawing at once. The drywall bulged outward. Chloe stumbled backward, colliding with her desk. Her lamp lay shattered, glass crunching underfoot. Don't come in here," she whispered to herself, though she wasn't sure if she meant Mara or whatever was behind the wall. The eyes blinked again. This time they rolled upward, vanishing into the red glow, and in their place, a mouth began to form. It wasn't a mouth in the human sense, more like a gash tearing open the plaster itself. Jagged edges pulled apart, revealing rows of teeth made of broken stone and bone. A wet hiss slipped through them, curling into Chloe's ears. Hungry, so hungry, Chloe screamed. She grabbed the chair by her desk and hurled it against the wall. The crack splintered wider but didn't break through. Instead, the mouth widened, almost grinning. Footsteps thundered in the hallway outside. Mara's voice rang out. "Chloe? Chloe? Where are you?" Chloe bolted to the door, fumbling with the lock, yanking it open. Mara stood there, panting, her eyes wide with alarm. "What the hell? What's going on?" Mara gasped, taking in the state of the room. The red light, the black liquid crawling across the floor. Chloe grabbed her arm. "We have to go, now." But before Mara could move, the wall behind Chloe split open with a deafening crack. A section of plaster caved inward, crumbling to the floor. From within, a hand emerged. It was pale, slick, and wrung its fingers too long, the joints bending at odd angles. Its nails were black and sharp, leaving grooves as it clawed at the floor. Then another hand followed, dragging the rest of the body closer to breaking through. Mara screamed, yanking Chloe back. "What the hell is that?" Chloe's voice broke. I told you it was watching me." The thing's face began to push through the hole. Not quite human, not quite anything else, its skin mottled red and gray, its eyes glowing like dying embers. Its mouth gaped open, the same jagged grin Chloe had seen in the plaster. "Neighbor," it crooned, its voice filling the room. "We're here now." The floor shook violently. Pictures fell from the wall. The bulb in the ceiling fixture flickered and burst. Mara yanked Chloe toward the door, screaming, "Move!" And Chloe stumbled into the hallway with her, slamming the apartment door shut. Behind them, the sound of tearing wood and splitting plaster echoed, followed by a deep, guttural laugh. They raced down the stairwell, Chloe's lungs burning, her mind spiraling. But even as they fled, she swore she could still hear it whispering through the walls, through the very bones of the building. "You can't leave. You already let us in." They didn't stop running until the cool night air slapped against their faces. The street outside was nearly deserted, save for a flickering street lamp and the hum of a passing car in the distance. Chloe bent over, gasping, her hands trembling against her knees. Mara clutched her shoulder, equally breathless, eyes darting back toward the building. From here, the apartment block looked ordinary. Just bricks, windows, and shadows. No cracks in the walls, no glow. No proof of what they had seen. Mara swallowed hard. "What was that?" Chloe shook her head, tears blurring her vision. I don't know. But it's in there. It's..." A sound cut her off. From the fourth-floor windows, faint and muffled, came the steady rhythm of knocking. 3 times. Slow, measured. Both women froze. Then silence. Mara grabbed Chloe's arm, tugging her toward the street. "We're going to the police. Or a hotel. Anywhere but here." "Sam." Chloe let herself be pulled along, but her head kept turning back. She couldn't shake the feeling that the building was watching them. And as they reached the corner, the street lamp above them flickered and hissed. In the glow of its failing light, Chloe glanced up just once toward her bedroom window. For a moment she swore she saw her own silhouette standing there. Not Mara's, not anyone else's. Hers, perfectly still, perfectly mirrored. And behind that silhouette, the faint crimson glow spread like a stain across the glass. They didn't go to the police. What could they say? That the walls had eyes, that something monstrous had clawed its way into the room. The landlord would deny everything. The building would look unchanged in the daylight. So they booked a hotel for the night. Mara insisted Chloe stay in the same room, too afraid to leave her alone. But when Chloe finally drifted into restless sleep, Mara was the one who woke first. Something moved in the dark. A faint scratching not at the walls, but from the headboard itself. Mara sat up slowly, her heart pounding. She reached toward the nightstand lamp, but froze when she heard it. A whisper, low and familiar, threading through the wood like breath through a crack. "Don't worry." Mara's blood ran cold. "We're neighbors now." The next morning, When Chloe awoke, Mara was gone. Her bag still sat by the door. Her shoes, her coat, her phone all untouched. But in the headboard above Chloe's bed, barely visible, was a new hairline crack, a small dark hole right where Mara had been sleeping. And when Chloe pressed her ear against it, holding her breath, she heard something that made her blood freeze. A voice, soft, patient, familiar, calling her name. Story 2. The Midnight Call. They say the dead can't use telephones, but sometimes when the hour is late and the world is silent, the line between the living and the lost hums just enough for a call to slip through. Mark didn't believe in any of that. He was a rational guy, a first-year university student with too many classes, too much coffee in his system, and a roommate who preferred shadows over conversation. Jake. The two of them had been paired by chance in the campus housing lottery. Their dorm room was little more than 2 beds, 2 desks, and one shared window that overlooked the quad. It should have been cramped, unbearable even. But Jake kept to himself. He never left laundry scattered across the floor, never left dishes in the sink. He barely left a trace at all. Most nights Mark would collapse into bed, grateful for the silence. But that night, the phone rang. It wasn't his. Mark's phone lay on the nightstand, dark and still. The ringtone came from across the room. Jake's phone. Mark groaned, half asleep, and rolled onto his side. The room was lit only by the pale glow of the moon spilling through the blinds, washing everything in silver. He could see Jake's silhouette sitting upright on the edge of his bed, the faint glow of the screen lighting his face. "Who the hell's calling you at?" Mark muttered, his voice rough with sleep. He glanced at the clock. 2:13 a.m. Jake didn't answer. He lifted the phone to his ear and whispered something Mark couldn't hear. His shoulders were rigid, his head bowed, as though listening intently. Mark blinked. The air felt colder suddenly. "Jake?" he said again. No response. Jake stood slow and deliberate and crossed the room. His steps were silent on the carpet. He slipped out the door, phone still pressed to his ear. Mark lay there in the half-dark, disoriented. It wasn't unusual for people to get late-night calls, girlfriends, parents, wrong numbers, but something about the way Jake moved unsettled him. Too quiet, too secretive. Mark rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. He told himself to forget it, to go back to sleep. But just as his eyelids began to droop, his phone rang. The sudden noise jolted him upright. The ringtone was sharp, too loud in the stillness. He grabbed it quickly, heart pounding. The number flashing on the screen was unfamiliar. No name, no area code he recognized. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then he answered. "Hello?" At first, silence. Then, breathing. Not the steady rhythm of someone caught off guard, but ragged, shallow gulps, like someone running just out of sight. Mark sat frozen. "Who is this?" The breathing grew faster, and then, a laugh. It was high-pitched, uneven, like a child's giggle stretched out of shape. It rose in volume, filling the line, until Mark ripped the phone away from his ear and stabbed at the screen to end the call. The dorm room was silent again. Mark sat in the dark, phone clutched tight in his fist, his pulse racing. He wanted to tell himself it was a prank. Wrong number. Some drunk student playing games. But the laugh had sounded too close, too real. He glanced at Jake's bed. Empty. Sheets still rumpled from where he had been sitting minutes before. And for the first time, Mark wondered if he really knew who or what his roommate was. Mark didn't sleep for the rest of that night. Every creak of the pipes, every gust of wind rattling the window blinds made him sit up and glance at the door. Jake didn't return until just before dawn. The door opened softly, almost politely, and Jake slipped inside. His head was bowed, his shoulders tense. He moved like someone trying not to wake a sleeping roommate. Mark lay perfectly still, his breathing slow and even, pretending to be asleep. Through half-closed eyes, he watched Jake. The other boy stood by his own bed for a long time. The glow of his phone illuminated his face, but at that angle, Mark could only see part of it, the curve of a cheek, the shadow of an eye. He didn't move, didn't scroll, didn't dial, just stared at the black screen as though waiting for it to light up again. Finally, Jake lay down. He rolled onto his side, away from Mark, and the room sank back into silence. Mark's phone remained on his nightstand, face down. But even without looking, he could feel it humming in his memory, phantom vibrations that weren't there. The next day dragged by in a haze. Mark tried to pay attention in his lectures, but his mind kept wandering back to the sound of that laugh. He pulled his phone out more times than he could count, scrolling through his call history. The number was still there, blocked, untraceable, but listed all the same. 2:27 a.m. call length, 42 seconds. That laugh had lasted less than a minute, yet it seemed to stretch into every waking thought. By evening, he convinced himself it had been a prank. Maybe one of his classmates, maybe a wrong number. He even started to feel silly for being shaken, until the phone rang again. It was 11:48 p.m. Jake was already in bed, back turned, the steady sound of his breathing filling the room. Mark sat at his desk, headphones in, typing half-heartedly at an essay. The ring sliced through the quiet. His stomach dropped. Same number. He yanked the headphones off, his pulse spiking. For a long moment, he just stared at the glowing screen. Then, with a shaky breath, he answered, "Hello?" This time, the line clicked immediately. A rush of static filled his ear, like waves crashing against a rocky shore. Beneath it, he could make out the same ragged breathing. "Who is this?" His voice cracked with tension. The static rose, nearly drowning everything out. But then just beneath it he heard the laugh again. The same distorted giggle. It bubbled and echoed, like it came from a child playing hide-and-seek underwater. Mark's hand trembled. He nearly dropped the phone. He slammed the call down, but before the relief could hit, it rang again. Same number. "No," Mark whispered, clutching it tighter. His eyes darted toward Jake's bed. Still, the shape of his roommate, under the blanket, unmoving. The phone rang again, and again. A shrill, endless chorus. Mark switched it to silent and tossed it onto his desk. But the screen kept lighting up with each incoming call, one after another, each one exactly 12 seconds apart. He pressed his palms against his ears, but he could feel the calls, buzzing against the desk, against his spine, crawling beneath his skin. At last, the buzzing stopped. Mark lowered his hands slowly, cautiously. The room was still again. Then, from the other side of the room, Jake's phone lit up. Its glow cast long shadows across the ceiling. Mark held his breath. The name flashing on the screen was the same blocked number. Jake sat up slowly, as if he'd been waiting for it all along. He lifted the phone and answered without hesitation. "Hello?" Jake whispered. Mark's stomach turned to ice. It was the same voice, the same ragged breathing, the same laugh. Only this time, Mark wasn't the one holding the phone. Jake stood again, moving toward the door, his posture stiff, mechanical. He slipped out silently, closing the door behind him. Mark sat frozen at his desk, the glow from Jake's phone still imprinted in his eyes. His own phone buzzed once more. Not a call, a text. The blocked number. He opened it with trembling hands. One word. "Listen." Mark barely slept after that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear the voice wet, distorted, chuckling as though pressed against his eardrum. He woke up in class to the sound of his own phone buzzing in his pocket, only to find no missed calls. His professor gave him a sharp glare, and the students nearby shuffled uncomfortably as Mark muttered an apology. He wasn't himself anymore. By the third night, Mark gave up on sleeping altogether. He sat at his desk with the light off, pretending to type, but really watching Jake. His roommate's routine was always the same now. Lie down early, perfectly still, back turned. Then, sometime past midnight, the phone would glow, and Jake would leave. Every time, Mark tried confronting him once, his voice thin and cracking. "Hey man, who keeps calling you at night?" Jake didn't turn around, didn't answer. Just shifted under the blanket, the silence stretching until Mark gave up. The next night, when Jake slipped out again, Mark followed. He crept down the hall of the dormitory, bare feet on cold tile. Jake moved quickly, almost too quickly, but his steps never faltered. Past the vending machines, past the stairwell, down toward the laundry room at the far end of the basement. The fluorescent lights flickered as Mark descended. The hum of old pipes filled the narrow corridor. Jake was standing in the laundry room, but he wasn't alone. Mark pressed himself against the wall, peeking around the frame. Jake had the phone to his ear, but he wasn't speaking. He was listening, nodding slowly, his lips curved into a faint, unnatural smile. And then Mark froze. Another phone lay on the dryer in front of Jake. Its screen glowed with the same blocked number, the same number calling two phones at once. Mark's chest tightened. He stepped back, his breath ragged. His hand brushed against the wall too loudly, and Jake's head snapped toward him. The smile vanished instantly. "Mark?" Jake's voice was calm, almost too calm. "Why are you down here?" Mark stammered something in excuse, a lie about laundry. But Jake just nodded, eyes dark, unreadable. "You shouldn't be awake this late," Jake said softly. "It's not safe." Mark fled back upstairs, his pulse hammering. He didn't sleep at all, not even when Jake returned hours later. Instead, he stared at his phone, willing it not to ring. But at exactly 2 a.m., it did. The same blocked number. This time, Mark didn't answer. He powered the phone completely off, tossed it under his pillow. For the first time in days, silence returned. Heavy, suffocating, but silence nonetheless. Relief washed over him until, from across the room, Jake's phone began to ring. Same tone, same blocked number. Jake answered in the dark, and Mark swore he heard two voices on the other end, both whispering his name. By the fourth night, Mark felt like he was living inside a nightmare he couldn't wake from. He hadn't told anyone because what could he say? That his roommate might not even be real? That phones were ringing from nowhere? That every whispered voice on the line seemed to know his name? Still, the unease inside him had grown into certainty. Something in his room wasn't Jake. That night, it rained. The kind of cold, relentless rain that rattled against the window panes and seeped through the cracks in the old dormitory walls. Jake went to bed early again, face turned away, body too still, as though he were rehearsing the idea of sleep rather than truly sleeping. Mark lay rigid in his own bed, eyes on the faint outline of Jake's back. He told himself not to look at his phone. Don't check the time. Don't wait for it to happen. But at exactly 2 a.m., his phone vibrated against the nightstand. Blocked number. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just stared at Jake. And then, without turning, Jake's voice broke the silence. "Aren't you going to answer, Mark?" Mark's blood turned to ice. The phone continued to buzz. Jake still hadn't moved. Still lay with his back to him, body stiff, face hidden in the dark. The phone stopped ringing. A pause. Then it began again. Louder. Insistent. Jake exhaled long, slow, deliberate. "You make it harder when you ignore them," he whispered. Mark's trembling hand reached for his phone, almost against his will. He swiped to answer. Static flooded his ear. Not white noise, but wet noise, like someone breathing into a microphone underwater. He pulled the phone away instinctively, but the sound didn't stop. It was leaking from the speaker, thick and gurgling. Then a voice slithered through the distortion. "Roommate." It was Jake's voice, or close enough. Stretched, bent, warped. "I've been calling, but you never answer. I'm right here." Mark turned. Jake, his roommate, the one lying in bed, was now sitting upright. Not slowly, not naturally, but as though his body had been pulled by strings, his head tilted in the dark, bones creaking. The glow from Mark's phone screen caught his eyes. They weren't human eyes. They were glossy and black, like the surface of water at night. "Mark," the voice whispered again, but this time it wasn't coming from the phone. It was coming from Jake, from right across the room. The phone slipped from Mark's hand. He stumbled backward, knocking against his desk chair, breath ragged, pulse deafening in his ears. Jake, or whatever wore Jake's skin, swung its legs over the side of the bed, rising in a slow, mechanical motion. "You've kept me waiting," it said. Its voice overlapped with the phone still hissing on the floor, two Jakes speaking in unison. One close, one impossibly far away. Then, in perfect sync, they said, "Now, it's your turn to answer." The rain had not stopped when the clock pushed past 3, though by then it no longer sounded like weather. It sounded like a steady hand, drumming against the windows, testing the glass, measuring the walls. Mark lay awake in the narrow dormitory bed, staring at the ceiling until the shadows seemed to pulse. He could not bring himself to move, not even to adjust the thin blanket twisted around his legs. He felt watched, studied, weighed down by an attention that had nothing to do with his roommate's presence and everything to do with what lingered in the spaces between. The storm had drained the room of color. The lamps along the courtyard outside sent pale, jaundiced light through the rain. but it dissolved before reaching the far side of their dorm. That side, Jake's side, was swallowed whole, as if the room itself were choosing what to reveal and what to bury. Mark told himself not to look, not to check, but the silence on that side of the room was louder than the storm. He felt his heart matching the rhythm of the water on glass, faster each time the thunder refused to come. The phone was still on the floor where it had fallen earlier, but Mark had nudged it closer to his bed with his foot. He could not resist it. The glow it gave off like the eye of something half awake. The screen no longer displayed a number. In fact, it no longer displayed anything at all, yet it hummed with a thin line of static, as if the speaker had become a mouth for a voice, not ready to finish speaking. Mark had tried to shut it off, had even held the power button down until his thumb ached, but the phone did not yield. It stayed alive, vibrating now and then with no incoming call, only to fall silent again like a patient predator. What unsettled him most was not the sound itself, but the way the sound seemed to seep into the air. The static was no longer confined to the phone. It had begun to crawl into the plaster, into the floorboards, into his body. He felt it under his skin, a faint electric sting every time he exhaled. He wondered whether Jake could feel it too. Jake, or what wore Jake, was turned toward the wall, shoulders rising in perfect imitation of sleep. The posture was too rehearsed, the rhythm of breath too exact. There was no small movement, no shift of weight, no twitch of muscle, only stillness. Mark thought of mannequins, of museum exhibits posed behind glass. It was not the stillness of a person asleep, but of something preserving the idea of sleep for his benefit. He rolled onto his side, back to the wall, face toward the dim window. He tried to pretend that dawn was closer than it was, that the paling of the sky meant safety, but he knew better. He had always hated this time of night, the hour that felt like the world had forgotten you existed. The campus outside was drowned, the courtyard emptied, the whole building holding its breath. If he screamed, if he pounded the wall, no one would come. He doubted they could hear him at all. He closed his eyes. He told himself not to listen, not to notice the sound. Yet once you hear static, you cannot unhear it. It burrows in. Behind the hiss, he thought he caught a rhythm, like a syllable repeated, stretched too far to resemble speech, and then fainter, still breathing. The kind that matched his own, as though the voice on the other side had chosen to inhale when he did, to exhale when he did, until the line between them collapsed. He pressed the pillow over his ears. It did nothing. The sound traveled through the pillow, through the mattress, through him. He thought of pulling the fire alarm, running barefoot into the storm, never coming back, but the weight of the room pinned him in place. There was no moment to flee, no natural break in the silence that would let him move without announcing himself. The phone vibrated once more. He ignored it. It rattled against the floorboards, fell still, then vibrated again. On the third time, he reached for it without meaning to. The way you reach for an itch, you cannot stop scratching. His fingers closed around it, damp with sweat. The screen was black. His reflection blinked back at him, his face distorted, elongated by the angle. He pressed it to his ear, though no call had come. The static was softer now, almost gentle, almost lulling. A whisper folded itself into the noise. Not words at first, but a low cadence, the kind of muttering you'd hear in a dream you half remember. When the syllables sharpened, his name slipped free. Mark. Not shouted, not even spoken. Released. His throat tightened. He wanted to look at Jake, to confirm what he already knew, but he couldn't. The name came again, slower this time, as if savoring the weight of it. Mark. There was nothing unfamiliar in the sound of it. That was what unsettled him most. It wasn't foreign, it was familiar. It carried the rise and fall of someone who had practiced his name 100 times, who had rehearsed it until it belonged to them more than it did to him. The voice melted into a kind of cooing, a lullaby rhythm, patient and steady. It slipped beneath his defenses, slid into the creases of his exhaustion. His limbs felt heavy, his eyelids burned. He wanted to resist, to throw the phone across the room, but his body no longer obeyed him. He could only lie there, listening, as if his ears had been rewired to crave the sound. Through the veil of fatigue, he thought he heard another sound layered beneath, not static, not whispering, but the echo of his own voice, breathing when he breathed, sighing when he sighed, as if whatever was on the other end had synchronized itself with him perfectly. no longer outside but within. And then, when he was certain sleep would claim him despite the dread, the voice steadied. "You don't need a roommate, Mark. You need me." The words did not arrive in the tone of Jake's voice, nor in a stranger's. They arrived in his own, each syllable echoing back into his skull. He sat bolt upright, but the sound followed, unfazed, still speaking as though he had never moved. The phone screen went blank. The static ceased, and yet, in the hush that followed, he felt it, the breath not his own, rising and falling beside him. Perfectly timed, perfectly patient. He did not look. He did not move. He only lay there, eyes wide, waiting for a dawn that might never come. Story 3. The photograph of Mother. Rain had fallen most of the afternoon, the kind of steady drizzle that softens the edges of the city and dulls the noise of passing cars. By evening, the streets outside Ethan's apartment had taken on the glossy sheen of film negatives, dark surfaces catching light in fragments, never whole. He had left the lamps off inside, allowing the gray to seep in through the windows. The silence was heavy, yet not unfamiliar. It had been a week since his mother's funeral, and silence was the only companion that had stayed with him. He had grown used to it, the way the air seemed to press down without her voice to fill it, the way the walls seemed taller without her presence to anchor him. The apartment smelled faintly of damp cardboard. Boxes were stacked in a corner, the ones he had carried home from her house. He had not opened them until now. The box sat in the center of the floor, its flaps pulled back like stiff wings. Inside, layers of photographs waited, most yellowing at the edges, some curled, others stuck together from years of humidity. Ethan sat cross-legged on the rug, his camera tripod leaning against the sofa, a silent witness to his hesitation. He had told himself he was ready to look, that photographs were only paper, that they could not hurt. But as he sifted through them, family gatherings, childhood summers, snapshots from birthdays and graduations, he realized memory carried a different weight when captured. Every photograph was a doorway, and he could feel the pull of each one. At last, buried near the bottom, he found a picture that made him pause. A family photo. His mother in her 30s, smiling faintly, holding him as a toddler. His own cheeks were round, his hair wild and uncombed, his eyes drawn not to the camera but to something just beyond the frame. His mother's expression was tender, weary perhaps, but touched with pride. It should have been an ordinary photograph, but Ethan's gaze snagged on a detail he could not ignore. His mother's arms were cradling him, but her hands were wrong. One rested beneath him, but the other did not appear where it should. Her right hand, the one that ought to have been curved around his tiny shoulder, was absent. The sleeve of her blouse ended at her elbow, trailing off into empty space. And yet, his young self was being held, someone's hand pressed against his small back, visible only in the shadowed blur near his shoulder. It was not his mother's. The fingers were long, too long for comfort, and they seemed to blur with motion, as though the camera had caught them retreating. They were pale, sharper at the joints, and though the rest of the figure was absent from the image, those fingers were undeniably there. He stared until his eyes ached. Perhaps it was only the fault of the photograph, a trick of exposure, an accident of the film. He tried to rationalize. Old cameras often caught light strangely, or left artifacts where the shutter dragged, yet his body did not believe it. His skin prickled, his breath caught, and the silence in the room grew dense, as if it too had noticed the hand. Ethan set the photo aside, face down on the rug. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes until shapes danced there, anything to erase the impression of that hand. When he lowered them again, the box still waited, the photos still whispering fragments of lives once lived, but his attention remained shackled to the one image. He had always been close to his mother. In her final weeks, she had been frail, her words softer, but one promise had clung to her lips as the days dwindled. "When I'm gone, Ethan, don't be afraid to carry me with you. Promise me that, son. Promise me you'll never forget the weight of your mother on your shoulders." At the time, he had smiled through tears, believing it was her way of saying he must remember her, honor her, live in a way she would have been proud of. Now, staring at the photograph, he wondered if her words had been meant differently. The room grew darker as the rain slowed. The box of photos seemed deeper, as though the images within had begun to fold into one another, layering voices and shadows. Ethan reached for the tripod, setting it in place almost absent-mindedly, as though his body had made the decision before his mind. He wanted no, needed to capture something of her, to honor her through his own lens. He positioned the camera, adjusted the timer, and sat down in front of it, hands folded in his lap. A small red light blinked once, then again, steady as a heartbeat. The shutter clicked. When the preview appeared on the screen, Ethan felt his stomach hollow. The photograph showed him seated exactly as he was, except for the hand, resting on his shoulder, pale against the black of his shirt, unmistakably real. The photograph lingered on the camera's screen, the faint glow casting a sickly light into the dim apartment. Ethan sat frozen on the rug, his breath uneven. The hand, pale, defined, utterly foreign, rested on his shoulder with the tenderness of someone who belonged there. Yet there was no one. He had been alone. He knew this with the certainty of every quiet second that had ticked by since he closed the door hours ago. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he touched his own shoulder, pressing his palm against the exact spot. It was warm from his own body heat, but the memory of something colder ghosted across his skin, as though his nerves had stored the imprint. He shut the camera off with a sharp flick, the sudden darkness of the screen more comforting than the image it had shown. For a while he sat motionless, the silence returning like a tide, surrounding him. Outside, the rain had dwindled to an occasional patter against the window, like cautious fingers. His apartment, normally a refuge, felt unfamiliar now, stretched by shadows that pooled in corners, lengthening as the last light of day retreated. He told himself not to panic. Photographs had flaws, ghost images, strange exposures, even digital glitches. Perhaps his own reflection, caught strangely by the lens, had mimicked a hand. Perhaps light had bent through the glass, creating the illusion of touch. He clung to these explanations, repeating them like mantras, but each time he closed his eyes, the image returned. Sharper, undeniable. The hand had looked too deliberate, too present. Ethan rose and began pacing. His mother's box of photos remained open on the rug, the weight of the past spilling from it. He could not resist. Kneeling, he sifted through them again, his fingers trembling more from expectation than cold. He studied each photograph with newfound scrutiny. Birthdays, holiday meals, summers at the beach, ordinary moments preserved in faded color. But the longer he looked, the less ordinary they seemed. In one, he saw his 5th birthday. His mother leaned over a cake glowing with candles, her smile warm, her eyes focused on him. But behind her shoulder, in the narrow slice of shadow cast by the kitchen doorway, Ethan noticed a blur. A hand, perhaps. Its edges indistinct, as though caught mid-motion. He flipped to another photo Christmas morning, torn wrapping paper scattered around. His small self hugged a new toy car, his mother kneeling beside him. And there, near the base of the tree, half hidden by silver tinsel, was the faint outline of fingers curling around the box. Each discovery sent a current through him. The hands were never clear, never whole, but they were there, always near him, always in proximity to his mother. Sometimes blurred, sometimes sharp, never acknowledged, never explained. He pulled the earlier photo, the one of his mother, holding him as a toddler, back into view. The long, pale fingers pressed against his small back. He could not deny the pattern now. The presence had always been there, watching, holding. The realization unsettled him in ways words could not contain. The air seemed heavier in the apartment, as though the walls themselves absorbed his unease. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his temples. His thoughts drifted to the last weeks with his mother, the promise he had made to carry her with him. She had spoken often of weight, of shoulders, of being held. At the time, he thought it metaphor. What if it had been more? A memory surfaced. He was a child again, fever burning through him. Delirious in bed, his mother had sat beside him all night, her hand cool on his forehead. He had drifted in and out of sleep, but once, briefly, he had felt a second touch, larger, heavier, pressing against his back. He remembered whimpering, but his mother had soothed him, whispering, "Don't be afraid, Ethan. You're not alone." The memory had been buried, dulled by time, yet now it returned vivid, undeniable. He stood abruptly, needing distance from the photos. Gathering them hastily, he slid them back into the box, closing the flaps as if sealing something dangerous inside. The cardboard rasped against itself, the sound harsh in the silence. The apartment seemed colder now, the kind of chill that seeped through walls rather than through windows. He moved to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water. His reflection in the dark window startled him. His own face, pale and tired, seemed to strangers. Behind his shoulder, the kitchen light flickered briefly, catching him off guard. He turned quickly. Nothing. Only the steady hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the wall clock. But he could not shake the sense that the room was more crowded than it should be. Back in the living room, he avoided the box, settling instead on the sofa. He turned on the lamp, grateful for the warm glow. Though the shadows it cast seemed deeper, he picked up his camera, hesitant, thumb brushing the power button. He wanted to delete the photo, to erase it, to undo what had been captured. But some stubborn part of him resisted. Instead, he scrolled back through old shots on the memory card: street photography, portraits, landscapes, normal, ordinary. But when he returned to the recent image, his pulse quickened. There he was, seated on the rug. And there, the hand, resting as naturally as any mother's would. Yet, the longer he looked, the less foreign it seemed. The angle of the wrist, the curve of the fingers, it mirrored his mother's. He had seen those hands countless times, lifting groceries, mending torn fabric, cupping his face when life had wounded him. It was impossible, yet familiar, terrifying, yet comforting. The contradiction unsettled him more than fear alone could. He placed the camera face down on the sofa and leaned back, closing his eyes. He told himself to rest, to stop spinning threads of imagination from threads of grief. He was tired. He was vulnerable. He was seeing patterns where none existed. But even with his eyes closed, the sensation persisted. The weight of a hand, steady on his shoulder. Not heavy, not cruel, simply present. He opened his eyes. The room was empty. Hours passed. Ethan drifted between wakefulness and sleep, the apartment a cocoon of restless quiet. When at last he rose to prepare for bed, the unease followed. He brushed his teeth with deliberate slowness, lingering before the mirror, half expecting another reflection to stare back. His skin prickled when the hallway light buzzed faintly before steadying. He lay down finally, pulling the blanket up to his chest. The ceiling stretched above him, faintly lit by city glow filtering through curtains. His eyelids grew heavy, yet each time they lowered, he felt the same unease coil tighter. There was a presence behind him, not imagined, not dreamed, felt. The mattress did not dip. No floorboard creaked, yet the certainty of being watched weighed against him. His mother's words echoed, "Don't be afraid, Ethan. You're not alone." Sleep claimed him at last, uneasy and shallow. His dreams were scattered images, a child's laughter, the blur of pale fingers, the comfort of being held and the terror of not knowing by whom. And when the clock struck midnight, the apartment seemed to exhale, as though something within had awakened. Morning returned with a thin, tired light that seemed to settle uneasily in Ethan's apartment. He hadn't slept well, but when the alarm on his phone chimed, he forced himself upright. The camera still sat on the table, mute and cold, but its presence weighed on him as though it were a living thing. He needed distance. He needed above all proof, something outside his imagination, outside the warped lenses of grief and exhaustion. After his second mug of coffee, he made a decision. He slipped the memory card from his camera into its plastic case, tucked it into his jacket pocket, and left the apartment. The air outside was brisk, tinged with the faint metallic scent of a city that had rained overnight. The sidewalks glistened, the asphalt breathing steam where sunlight hit. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter, kept his head down. He knew where he was going. There was a shop 2 blocks away, Harrison's Photography and Film, a stubborn remnant of the analog age that he'd visited once or twice for darkroom supplies. The bell above the door jingled when he entered. The shop was dim, shelves stacked with film rolls, photo paper, second-hand lenses. Behind the counter stood Mr. Harrison himself, a man in his 60s with spectacles perched low on his nose. His hair was silver, his hands stained faintly with developer. He looked up, offered a small nod. "Ethan, isn't it? Haven't seen you in some time." Ethan managed a faint smile. "Yeah, been busy. I was hoping you could print something for me, from digital." The older man arched a brow but gestured. "Of course. Let's see what you've got." Ethan slid the memory card across. His heart thudded. Part of him wanted to snatch it back, to keep the images private, but he forced his hand to stay still. Mr. Harrison inserted the card into a reader, the screen behind the counter flickering to life. Thumbnail previews lined the display test shots Ethan had taken the previous day. The cluttered rug, the box of photographs, and then that picture. Ethan stiffened. He could see the hand clearly, resting on his shoulder. He braced himself, waiting for Mr. Harrison's reaction. The man leaned closer, squinting, his lips pressed into a thin line. He clicked the mouse, enlarging the image. "Strange," he murmured. Ethan swallowed. "What do you see?" Harrison tapped the screen. "This shadow here. The hand. You staged this?" "No," Ethan said quickly. Too quickly. His throat felt dry. There was no one else in the room. The older man studied him, then the image again. He didn't speak for a long moment. Finally, he exhaled. "Well, cameras don't lie, son, but they don't always tell the whole truth either." He printed the photo without further comment. The machine hummed, paper sliding out slowly, inch by inch, until the image lay there in glossy permanence. Ethan stared at it himself on the rug, the hand pale and delicate upon his shoulder. Something about the print unsettled him even more than the screen. The hand looked sharper, the skin almost translucent, veins like faint threads of smoke beneath the surface, and the nails he hadn't noticed them before. They were too long. "Take it," Harrison said, sliding it across. "Maybe best not to dwell. Sometimes photographs catch what we'd rather forget." Ethan left quickly, the print tucked into a folder, his pulse hammering. On the sidewalk, the city noise felt distant, as though muffled under glass. He wanted to throw the photo away, yet he couldn't. It felt tethered to him, an anchor he couldn't cut loose. Back in the apartment, he set the print face down on the table. He poured a glass of water, tried to breathe, but the silence pressed close. And then he noticed it, the faintest scent drifting through the room, powdery, floral, unmistakable. Jasmine, his mother's perfume. He froze. His mother had worn that fragrance daily, its soft sweetness clinging to her scarves, her hair. But the bottle had been emptied, discarded, years ago. The scent lingered, drifting from nowhere and everywhere at once. His throat tightened, eyes stinging. Was it memory? Hallucination? The camera on the table blinked, its battery light flickered, though it wasn't even switched on. Ethan's gaze locked on it. Slowly, mechanically, he reached, turned the dial, lifted it to his eye. He aimed it across the room, toward the hallway mirror. Through the lens, the apartment looked ordinary, until it didn't. In the mirror, he saw himself, but there was someone behind him. A woman, indistinct, her face obscured by blur, but her hands rested on his shoulders, tender, possessive. Ethan lowered the camera instantly, heart slamming. The hallway was empty. Only his own reflection stared back. He staggered backward, bumping into the table. The photo print slid to the floor, landing face up. The hand on his shoulder gleamed in the lamplight, nails catching a faint red hue. He shut his eyes, pressed his palms to them. He thought of childhood again, of nights when he cried in the dark, when he begged his mother to stay. "Don't leave me alone, Mama," she always promised. "I won't. I'll always be near." The words circled in his head, no longer comfort but curse. That night, he couldn't bring himself to sleep. The jasmine grew stronger, filling every breath. At intervals, he swore he heard the shuffle of feet on the hardwood floor. Once, while he sat at the desk with his head in his hands, he felt the chair dip slightly, as though someone had settled their weight beside him. But when he turned, there was nothing. By 3 a.m, exhaustion overtook him. He lay on the couch, the lamp still burning. His last conscious thought before slipping under was of his mother's voice, soft as always, whispering from the space just behind his ear. "You promised, Ethan. You promised to carry me." Ample less. And he felt it then. The weight, not crushing, not painful, but inescapable, of arms draped lightly across his chest, as though someone were leaning against him, unseen but utterly real. The city outside Ethan's window was never truly quiet, but that night, silence seemed to thicken around him. It was the kind of silence that doesn't simply mean the absence of sound, it meant the swallowing of it, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ethan sat hunched on the couch, the lamp burning a pale circle into the gloom. The photograph lay on the table again, face up this time. He had told himself he wouldn't look, and yet his gaze kept drifting back, drawn like a moth to flame. The hand on his shoulder in the image seemed sharper than before. He could trace the curve of each finger, the ridges of the knuckles. He whispered to himself that it was just ink, just pigment on paper, but somewhere deep inside he knew it wasn't still. He could feel it. His phone buzzed suddenly, the sound jarring in the quiet. Ethan flinched, then grabbed it. A new message. Unknown number. It was a photo. For a moment he couldn't breathe. The image was of his apartment, his living room, this very couch. And there he was himself, sitting just as he sat now, phone in hand, head slightly bowed. But there was more. Behind him, half shrouded in shadow, a figure leaned close. The hands were there again, pale, almost luminous, resting across his shoulders. His skin prickled with icy needles. He spun around. The room was empty. The corners held only shadow, the air faint with jasmine. Another message buzzed in. This one was text. Just 4 words. Don't forget your promise. Ethan's throat closed. He remembered the promise, foolish, tender, made when he was a child of 7, maybe 8. His mother had been tired that day, her back aching, her smile lined with pain. He had wrapped his arms around her knees, declaring, "When I'm big, I'll carry you everywhere, Mama, on my back. You won't have to walk anymore." She had laughed then, brushed his hair from his forehead, kissed him softly. "You'll carry me? Always?" "Always," he had said, and she had whispered something in return, so low he thought he'd imagined it at the time. "Then I'll hold you forever, Ethan." The memory washed over him now, not warm but cold, chilling. The promise had seemed like a child's oath, fragile and innocent. But what if she had taken it seriously? What if death itself had not been enough to break it? He dropped the phone onto the couch, stood abruptly. The air pressed close, heavy. He needed to move, to do something. His eyes fell on the box of photographs again. The lid was askew, several prints spilling onto the rug. He hadn't touched it since that first day. But now it felt almost alive, as though it waited for him. He crouched, hands trembling, and began to sift through the images. His mother's face smiled from glossy rectangles, her holding him as a baby, her standing in the sun with flowers in her arms, her waving from a doorway. But then he found one that made his stomach twist. It was an ordinary scene. A park bench, himself as a child sitting on it, his mother beside him. Yet behind them, blurred but distinct, were hands. Hands resting on both their shoulders, though no body attached to them. His fingers tightened, the paper crinkling. These weren't tricks of the lens, they were records, proof. Something had been there all along, hovering at the edges of their life. The floorboards creaked suddenly behind him. Ethan froze. Very slowly, he turned his head. The hallway beyond the living room was dark, but from the shadows, he heard the faint drag of breath. Slow, heavy, almost loving. His mouth went dry. "Mom," he whispered, the word breaking. Silence answered. Then, a soft shuffle of feet. The jasmine thickened until he nearly gagged. Ethan stumbled back, clutching the photograph box to his chest. His pulse thundered, ears ringing. He didn't want to look, but his eyes betrayed him lifting, straining toward the dark. Something moved. A shape, a suggestion of a figure, tall, thin, indistinct. And then, the lamp flickered violently, plunging the room into momentary darkness before sputtering back to life. In that brief blackout, Ethan had felt it. Not seen, not heard, felt. Hands cold and gentle closing around his shoulders. He screamed, dropped the box. Photos scattered like dead leaves across the floor. When the lamp steadied, the room was empty once more. But the impression of touch lingered, icy fingerprints burning through his shirt. His phone buzzed again. He snatched it up with shaking hands. Another photo. This time it was darker, grainier, as though taken through water. He lay on the couch in the image, eyes closed, asleep, and behind him, the figure was clearer, still faceless, still blurred, but with arms wrapped tight around his chest, holding him as though in eternal embrace. Text followed. "Time to carry me, Ethan." His knees gave out. He slumped against the wall, phone clattering to the floor. There was no denying it anymore. This was not grief, not madness, not imagination. Something had come for him, something that wore his mother's hands. and it wasn't going to let go. The hours blurred. Ethan no longer knew if it was night or early morning. The city beyond his window seemed impossibly far away, muffled, as if he were sealed inside a jar where time had slowed. The only thing sharp, insistent, undeniable, was the scent of jasmine. It drifted through every room, saturating his clothes, clinging to his hair, sinking into his skin. Once it had reminded him of his mother's gentle touch, the quiet evenings when she sat by the window with tea cooling in her hands. Now, it was suffocating, as though every breath pulled her deeper inside him. He hadn't dared pick up the photographs from the floor. They lay scattered like fragments of glass, each image staring back at him with that same impossible detail. In every single one, there were the hands. Always the hands. Sometimes blurred, sometimes clear, but always there. A promise. Immortalized. His phone sat dark now, its screen black and still. But Ethan knew better than to believe it was silent. It was waiting, patient, like the thing in the shadows. He tried to sleep once, curled on the couch, knees tucked, exhaustion pressing down on him like a weight. But each time he began to drift, he felt it. A tug at his shoulder, the ghost of fingers brushing his skin. He jerked awake to nothing but darkness. And then, once more, to the smell of jasmine. At last he rose. The apartment felt smaller than it had ever been, its walls pressing close, its windows reflecting his pale face back at him. He walked, barefoot, across the wooden floor, and every step echoed louder than it should have, as if someone followed just behind. In the kitchen, the overhead light hummed. He thought of making tea something normal, something grounding. But when he opened the cupboard, he froze. The cups inside were not where they should have been. Instead, a single object sat at the center of the shelf, the photograph of his mother holding him as a child, the original one, the first one he had found. He hadn't put it there. He was sure of it. His breath stuttered. He reached up slowly, fingers brushing the edge. The paper was warm, not cold, warm like skin. And then, from behind him, a whisper. Ethan, soft, almost loving. He spun. No one. Only the faint sway of the curtain by the window, though the glass was closed. His knees weakened. He pressed the photo to his chest. His mother's smile beamed up at him from the image, tender and frozen in time. But the longer he stared, the more wrong it seemed. Her smile widened, stretching, bending into something else. And those hands, those endless hands, seemed to tighten around the child version of himself. Tears filled his eyes. "Mom, please," he whispered. "If it's you, please let me go." Silence, then movement. The photos on the floor rustled, though no wind stirred. One by one, they shifted, sliding toward him. A slow shuffle, like cards drawn by an unseen dealer. They gathered at his feet, forming a ring around him. And then the lights flickered out. Ethan stood in darkness so absolute it felt alive. His own breath rasped in his ears, frantic, shallow. The jasmine thickened until it was choking. A perfume turned poisonous, and in that blackness he felt it. Arms, thin and cold, wrapping around him from behind, pulling him close, pressing his spine to a chest that was not there. He gasped, struggled, but the grip was unyielding. A voice breathed against his ear. So close he felt the brush of lips that weren't flesh. "You promised." His body shook. He clawed at the arms, but his hands passed through emptiness, through cold air, through nothing at all. Yet still, they held him. "You promised to carry me." The voice was both his mother's and not. Gentle, soothing, but threaded with something ancient, endless, hungry. "Now I will carry you." The floor gave way, or perhaps it was his mind. Ethan's world tilted, spiraled, fell into a dark that went deeper than sleep. The last thing he saw, though he could not explain how he saw in that blindness, was his reflection in the window. He stood there, still as glass, his own face pale and vacant, and behind him, clear at last, a woman's shape. Thin, tall, arms wrapped tightly around him, her smile the same as in every photograph. The image shimmered once, like the click of a camera shutter, then all was gone. Morning came. The neighbors would later say they heard nothing. The apartment remained locked, the curtains drawn. Only the photographs told a different story. When the landlord entered weeks later, after unanswered calls and mounting complaints, he found the place abandoned. Dust settled on the furniture. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, and on the table lay a single photo. Ethan, asleep on the couch, a faint smile on his lips. And behind him, arms wrapped lovingly around his chest, pulling him closer. The caption, scrawled in a hand no one recognized, read, "Forever." Story 4. The Reaper in the Restroom. The night was not kind to Sarah. Her shift had ended late, later than she had hoped. The city was a blur in her rearview mirror now, neon lights shrinking into tiny sparks against a black sky. She drove alone, her body aching, her eyelids heavy. The road stretched out in long ribbons of concrete, shimmering faintly beneath the pale wash of the moon. There was something about that hour, that liminal space between night and dawn, that always unsettled her. The world felt emptied of everyone but herself. Street lamps hummed, but no cars passed. Even the radio had gone to static, as if the airwaves themselves had fallen asleep. And of course, her body betrayed her. A sharp cramp twisted in her stomach, low and insistent. Sarah groaned softly, pressing a hand to her middle. She hadn't eaten well, hadn't slept enough. She needed a break. So when the small green sign appeared by the side of the road, its paint chipped and half erased by time, she slowed down. Rest area, 500 yards. She pulled off onto the exit ramp. The asphalt cracked beneath her tires. The trees leaned heavy over the road, branches clawing at the sky. At first she thought the rest stop was abandoned. A single lamppost flickered weakly, its light pale and jaundiced, casting more shadows than illumination. The building itself was squat and gray, graffiti climbing its walls like ivy. The parking lot was empty, save for her own car. Sarah sat for a moment, the engine idling. Something about the silence pressed against her ears. No crickets, no wind, just waiting. But the cramp in her stomach left her no choice. She killed the engine, stepped out, and the air hit her at once cold, damp, thick with the scent of wet concrete and mildew. Her shoes echoed across the lot as she walked toward the building. The restroom door was metal, painted a dull brown that had flaked away in patches to reveal rust. A handwritten sign was taped near the handle, its ink smeared and illegible. She hesitated, then pushed. The door groaned open, heavy, as if it resented her entry. Inside, the air was worse. Sour, stagnant. The faint buzz of a dying fluorescent tube above her head filled the silence. The walls were tiled in dull white, cracked in places, stained with years of neglect. A single window, high near the ceiling, let in a trickle of moonlight. Her footsteps echoed too loudly as she moved across the floor. The stall doors creaked softly in the draft, though she hadn't felt any breeze. And then she heard it. Not a movement, not the scuttling of a rat or the hiss of a pipe. A sound that seemed human. A breath, low, drawn out, heavy, like the exhale of someone who had been waiting far too long. Sarah froze, her hand half raised to the stall door, her ears strained. It came again, a sigh. Long, tired, deliberate. She turned slowly, heart beginning to hammer in her chest. In the far corner, just where the dim light failed to reach, she saw it. A shape. A man. Old, impossibly thin. His body swallowed by a long coat of black fabric. He stood perfectly still, his head bowed slightly, as though in thought. The shadows made hollows of his cheeks, carved deep trenches around his eyes. Sarah's breath caught. The man didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. At first, her mind scrambled for excuses. Perhaps he was homeless, seeking shelter from the cold. Perhaps he was drunk, asleep on his feet. Perhaps anything but the crawling thought that she was not supposed to see him there. Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to ask, "Are you all right?" But the words lodged in her chest. There was something in the way he stood that silenced her, the stillness, the unnatural composure, as if he had been waiting for her. The air felt heavier now. She noticed it pressing against her skin, damp and suffocating. The smell of mildew was stronger, layered with something sharper like iron. Her stomach twisted again, not from digestion but from dread. Still, she forced herself forward. She had come here for a reason. If she turned back now, she would have to endure another 30 minutes on the road in discomfort. Just ignore him, she whispered to herself. Her shoes tapped against the tile as she slipped into the nearest stall. She closed the door gently, almost apologetically, as though afraid to make noise. The lock clicked. Silence. She sat there, motionless, her ears straining for any sound. The buzzing light above seemed louder now, drilling into her skull. She imagined him standing outside her stall, his breath misting against the crack in the door, his eyes fixed on her through the narrow slit. Her heart raced. She tried to steady her breathing. Inhale, exhale, count. And then she remembered. When she was a child, maybe 7 or 8, she had gotten lost at a county fair. She had wandered into the wrong corridor near the fairgrounds restroom. The lights had been broken, the air damp and smelling of bleach. And in the corner, she had seen an old man sitting alone, staring at the floor, his lips moving silently as though in prayer. She had backed away slowly, too scared to ask for help. Now, years later, the memory returned, sharp as a blade. The same smell, the same silence, the same feeling of being intruded upon by something she didn't understand. Her hand hovered near the lock. Should she leave? Should she run? And then, the sound of shoes. Not hers, not imagined. Deliberate, measured. A slow scrape of soles across the tile. One step, another, then stillness. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut. She didn't dare breathe. The silence thickened, so heavy she could hear the pulse in her ears. When she finally gathered the courage to look through the crack in the stall door, she saw nothing but dim light and shadows. The corner where the man had been was empty. Her breath stuttered. Had she imagined him? Was exhaustion twisting her senses? But the smell was still there. The heaviness was still there. And the faint echo of those footsteps lingered. Sarah sat frozen for what felt like minutes, perhaps longer. Time stretched strangely inside that room, as if the clock had stopped ticking the moment she entered. Finally, she forced herself up, hands trembling as she unlatched the door. She pushed it open slowly, careful not to let the hinges creak. The restroom looked the same. Cracked tiles, flickering light, empty stalls. But the air felt different, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. She stepped out cautiously, scanning every corner. Nothing. And then her eyes caught something. Near the sink, in the reflection of the grimy mirror, she saw him. Not in the flesh, not standing in the room, only in the glass. The man, old, gaunt, wrapped in black. His eyes locked on hers through the reflection, though when she turned sharply, the space behind her was empty. The mirror trembled slightly in its frame, as if vibrating with the effort of holding him there. Sarah's knees weakened. Her throat tightened. She could no longer deny it. She was not alone. Sarah stood frozen before the mirror, the damp air of the restroom clinging to her skin like a second layer. Her reflection trembled faintly in the cracked glass, but her eyes remained fixed not on herself, but on the figure behind her or within the glass itself. The old man was still there. He looked the same as before, tall, gaunt, his shoulders draped in that strange black garment that resembled neither coat nor robe. The folds of fabric seemed to swallow the light around him, leaving his body more like a void than a presence. His face, if it could be called that, was carved with deep lines, sunken and pale, as though drained of color by centuries. His eyes, Sarah could not tell if they were black, or merely holes did not blink. They simply watched. Her pulse thudded in her ears. A trembling whisper slipped from her lips before she could stop it. Who are you?" Her voice sounded strange in the restroom, muffled by the heavy air. For a moment she thought she had imagined speaking at all, because no echo came back. The only reply was silence, thick and unnatural. But then, the figure moved, not in the room, only in the glass. His head tilted slightly, a gesture that carried the weight of ancient patience, as though he was examining a curiosity. Sarah's knees weakened. She gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles white. She turned sharply, half expecting to see him standing behind her, close enough to touch. But there was nothing. The tiles were empty. When she looked back to the mirror, he was gone. The space behind her reflected nothing but her own trembling form. Sarah's breath rushed out in a shaky exhale, relief mixed with terror. Her rational mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe her exhaustion, maybe the flickering light and the dirt on the mirror had tricked her. But deep inside, in that primal part of her that still remembered childhood fears, she knew what she saw, and she knew more importantly that it had seen her. The restroom door loomed across the room, heavier now, farther away than it had been before. Every step toward it felt monumental, as though the floor itself resisted her movement. She forced her legs forward, her shoes squeaking faintly on the damp tiles. Halfway to the door, the sound returned. A breath, not hers. It filled the space, deep and rattling, like air pulled through lungs that hadn't drawn oxygen in years. Sarah froze, her body rigid. The sound came from the last stall on the right. The door of that stall was closed, its metal frame rusted and warped. A faint shadow moved beneath the gap. Not a shuffle, not random, deliberate, as though whoever or whatever was inside shifted its weight to make sure she saw. Her mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to run, to escape while she could. But her body betrayed her, rooted to the spot. She forced herself to speak again, though her voice shook. I don't want any trouble. I'm just leaving. The words fell flat, meaningless in the heavy air. From the stall there was silence, and then 3 slow knocks. Thud, 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 each one deeper than the last, echoing through the tiled chamber as if the walls themselves were hollow drums. Sarah's heart lurched. She turned toward the door, fumbling for the handle, desperate to get out. The door resisted her. The handle felt cold, wet beneath her fingers, as if it had been dipped in ice. She yanked harder, panic flaring in her chest. Behind her, the knocks came again, faster now. Thud, 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 thud. Her breath broke into short, sharp gasps. She pulled with all her strength, the door finally giving way with a groan of metal. She stumbled into the night air, collapsing against the concrete wall outside. The cold hit her like a wave, yet it felt like release. She gulped in the damp night, eyes wide, ears straining. The rest stop lot was empty, silent. But then, the door behind her creaked open. Sarah spun, heart slamming into her throat. There was nothing there, just the dark mouth of the restroom, yawning open, swallowing light, and then movement. A shadow stretched long across the floor inside, though there was nothing to cast it. The shape was unmistakable, tall, thin, hunched beneath a heavy black cloak. The shadow stretched toward her, inching closer, as though drawn by her fear. Sarah staggered back, her body trembling. Her car was only a dozen steps away. She could run. She could get in, slam the doors, and drive away, never looking back. But her body refused. Something about the shadow rooted her in place, as though it had reached out invisible fingers to clutch at her ankles. Her voice broke again, hoarse with fear. What do you want from me? For the first time, the shadow moved differently. Its head lifted, tilting as though acknowledging her question. And then, from the depth of the restroom, came a whisper, low, rough, yet clear. Time. Oh, the words slithered across the air, settling into her bones. Sarah stumbled back another step, her breath hitching. The shadow drew shorter now, retreating into the restroom's darkness, until it vanished completely. The silence that followed was worse. She waited seconds, maybe minutes, before she could finally force herself toward her car. Her keys rattled in her shaking hand. She slid inside, slammed the lock, and started the engine with trembling fingers. The lot was empty as she pulled away, but in the rearview mirror, as the restroom receded into the darkness, she thought she saw him, the old man, standing by the doorway, cloaked in black, watching her car vanish down the road, and smiling. Sarah drove with trembling hands, the white lines of the highway blurring beneath her. She told herself she was safe now, that she had escaped whatever nightmare had lingered in that restroom. But her heart did not slow. Her body did not relax. For deep down, she knew the truth. The man in black hadn't been left behind. He was with her now, somewhere in the silence of her car, in the rhythm of her breath, in the pulse of her blood. She could almost hear him breathing beside her. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of Sarah, a ribbon of faded asphalt glistening under the weak glow of sodium street lamps. Her car hummed along the empty road, a sound that should have been comforting, steady, mechanical, yet tonight it felt fragile, like the faintest thread holding her above a yawning void. The events in the restroom still clung to her, the cracks in the mirror, the shadow beneath the stall door, that whisper, time. Her mind kept circling back to it, as though the single word carried more weight than she could comprehend. What had he meant? Time for what? Time running out? Or time owed? Her hands trembled on the wheel. The dashboard clock ticked forward, each second impossibly loud in the hush of her car. Midnight had passed long ago. The numbers on the digital display glowed faintly green. 2:17 a.m. Sarah pressed harder on the accelerator. She just needed to get home, get inside, lock the door, pretend this night had never happened. But the further she drove, the less familiar the world became. She had taken this highway dozens of times before. She knew the rhythm of exits and overpasses, the pattern of gas stations and truck stops. But now, the road seemed altered, stretched into something alien. Mile after mile passed without a single landmark. No glowing signs, no headlights approaching from the other direction. Just darkness pressing in on either side, the trees along the shoulder bending inward like an endless corridor. Her throat tightened. She tried the radio, twisting the dial with frantic fingers. Static answered, white noise, broken occasionally by faint bursts of something that might have been voices or only echoes in the static. She turned it off quickly, the silence somehow worse. Her eyelids felt heavy. Fear kept her awake, but exhaustion weighed on her, dragging her body down. She rubbed her temples, whispering to herself, "Stay awake. Just stay awake." She glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see only the long strip of road dissolving into black behind her. But there he was, the old man, not standing this time, but sitting in the back seat, directly behind her. Sarah's entire body went cold. She whipped her head around, heart hammering, but the seat was empty. She forced her gaze forward again, clutching the wheel with white knuckles. Her breathing came fast, ragged, shallow. The car's engine stuttered. Just once, like a cough. Then again, longer. The headlights flickered, dimmed, and then recovered. Number no, no, no. Her voice cracked as she pressed the accelerator harder. The engine roared in protest, then settled back into its hum, but her confidence was shattered. The road ahead curved gently, and as her lights swept across the bend, she saw something. A vehicle pulled off on the shoulder. Its shape long, boxy, unfamiliar. As she drew closer, the details came into view, dark windows, chrome trim catching the faint light. A hearse. Her stomach dropped. It sat perfectly still, its polished surface gleaming faintly under the moonlight that managed to break through the clouds. The sight struck her with the inevitability of a nightmare, like something waiting for her, patient and unmoving. She gripped the wheel tighter, muttering under her breath, "Don't look at it. Just keep driving. Don't." Her eyes betrayed her. She looked. Through the driver's window of the hearse, a face turned toward her, pale, sharp, with deep, hollow eyes that seemed to glint red for an instant in her headlights. It was him, the old man. Her car jolted as she swerved slightly, dragging herself back into the lane with shaking hands. Her breath came in ragged bursts. The hearse didn't move. It didn't need to. Because when she looked again in the rearview mirror, she saw headlights appear behind her, bright, steady, approaching fast. Her mind screamed. It couldn't be, but it was. The hearse was behind her now, its lights burning into her vision. No, 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 no. Sarah's foot pressed the accelerator to the floor. Her car shuddered, engine groaning as the speed climbed. The white lines blurred past, faster and faster, but the hearse matched her effortlessly. Its headlights loomed closer, filling her mirror until she could see nothing else. She swerved into the next lane, heart pounding, but the hearse followed with surgical precision, never faltering. Its engine made no sound she could hear, no roar or rumble, just silence, smooth and terrifying. Her eyes burned with tears. Her chest ached with the strain of breathing too fast. She gripped the wheel so tightly her hands went numb. In the oppressive silence, a voice rose, not from the radio, not from the road, from inside the car. "Why do you run, child?" The voice was deep, ancient, patient. Sarah bit her lip, choking back a sob. "Leave me alone." The headlights behind her flared brighter, blinding, filling the car with harsh white. She squeezed her eyes shut for a second, then forced them open again. Her vision swam. The road twisted, blurred. For a heartbeat, she wasn't sure if she was on asphalt anymore, or something else, something endless and gray beneath her wheels. She shook her head violently. This isn't real. This isn't real. But when she glanced again in the mirror, she saw him, not just the headlights, but the man himself, sitting calmly in the driver's seat of the hearse. his hands folded on the wheel, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on her, and he was smiling. The road stretched on, and Sarah realized with a dawning horror that she no longer recognized where she was. No exits, no signs, no markers of any kind, just an eternal ribbon of highway, her own car, and the hearse that pursued her. Her eyelids fluttered with exhaustion, her thoughts scattered. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if this was how it ended, not with an accident, not with violence, but with an endless chase, circling the black roads of night until time itself ran out. And through it all, the whisper followed her. Time. The chase could not last forever. Sarah knew that. Her car rattled with every mile, the speedometer needle trembling at its limit. The highway itself seemed to resist her, stretching farther and farther, refusing to deliver her to any destination. And still the hearse followed. Its headlights had grown impossibly bright, swallowing her mirrors, painting the interior of her car in a sickly white glow. It wasn't simply pursuit anymore. It was presence, enveloping her, folding her inside it. Her hand slipped on the wheel, slick with sweat. The hum of the tires shifted subtly, the rhythm no longer quite right. Sarah blinked hard, trying to refocus. The lines on the road seemed different, not painted, carved, grooves etched deep into the asphalt, glowing faintly as though lit from beneath. Her chest tightened. The world outside the windshield no longer looked like any highway she had ever known. The trees were gone. The night sky hung lower, darker, starless. The horizon curved unnaturally, as if the road itself suspended her in a void. Sarah's breathing quickened. Number, this isn't real. This can't be real. But the hearse behind her made it real. Its lights no longer beams of halogen, but something older, whiter, burning with the cold intensity of bone. The closer it drew, the more she could hear not the roar of an engine, but the sound of wheels rolling over stones, slow and deliberate, like a funeral procession echoing from centuries past. Her body shivered. The voice returned, filling her ears as though it came from inside her own lungs. Child. The word hung heavy, not cruel, not gentle, simply inevitable. Sarah shook her head violently, tears stinging her eyes. Why are you doing this to me? What do you want from me? The whisper came again, louder, closer. Time. Her grip on the wheel faltered. The car shuddered, veered, and for a moment, she thought she might spin off into the void entirely. She pulled it back, gasping, her heart crashing against her ribs. The hearse surged forward, closing the distance until she could see its shape clearly in her rearview mirror. Polished black, spotless, though she swore she had seen rust before. The windows dark, opaque except the driver's. He sat there, calm, eternal, cloaked in shadows that seemed to belong not to fabric, but to the grave itself. His face remained expressionless, but his eyes burned faintly, like embers banked in ash. Sarah tore her gaze away, her mind fracturing beneath the weight of fear. She couldn't escape. She couldn't outrun him. Her thoughts scrambled for another way out. She pressed her palm hard against the dashboard, whispering a prayer she hadn't spoken since she was a child. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, soft bedtime words about angels and protection, about being watched over. But another memory surfaced, sharper, darker, her grandmother's warning. Never stop at the restrooms by Old Willow Road after midnight. Not unless you're ready to meet him. At the time, Sarah had laughed it off as superstition. She had been a child then, fearless in her ignorance. But now she understood. Her grandmother hadn't been speaking in riddles. She had been speaking of him, the Reaper, the figure who watched and waited in dark corners, who lingered in mirrors, who claimed those who stumbled into his path. And Sarah had stumbled straight into him, her vision blurred with tears. She wiped them away furiously. But the road ahead remained alien, shifting. The carved grooves glowed brighter, pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. Her car stuttered again. The engine coughed, wheezed, then steadied but weaker, as though drained of strength. The hearse pulled closer still. It was no longer just behind her. It was beside her. Sarah turned her head, terror rooting her in place. The hearse glided silently along the parallel lane, perfectly matched to her speed. The window on the driver's side lowered with a smoothness too deliberate, too inevitable. And there he was, the old man, closer than ever. his face lined not only with age, but with eternity. His mouth curved into something almost kind. Almost. He raised a single hand, pale and skeletal beneath the sleeve of his cloak. He pointed not at her, but at the passenger seat beside her. Sarah's breath froze. The seat was empty. It had been empty the entire night. But as her eyes fell on it now, she saw the faintest outline of something taking shape, a weight pressing into the fabric, the indentation of a body where no body Saturday. Her heart screamed in her chest. "No," she shouted, slamming her palm against the steering wheel. "You can't have me. You can't." The hearse's driver leaned closer. His lips moved, and though no sound should have carried across the rushing air, she heard him perfectly. "It is not about having. It is about taking back." Her blood ran cold. She gripped the wheel tighter, nails biting into the leather. "I'm not ready. I'm not." The hearse vanished, not slowed, not turned off the road, simply gone. One heartbeat it was there, the next it was absent, leaving her car alone in the void. Sarah gasped, glancing frantically in every mirror, every window. Nothing, just the empty road, the blackness pressing against her. And then she felt it, a hand, resting lightly on her shoulder, cold, patient. Her scream never left her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The voice whispered one last time, so close it brushed her ear. "Time, child. Yours has come." Her vision flickered, headlights dimming, the dashboard lights fading into nothing. The wheel grew slack in her hands, her body heavy, her thoughts unraveling. The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her was the faint reflection in the windshield, her own face, wide-eyed and pale, and behind it, towering over her, the figure in black. Silence. At first, Sarah thought it was relief. The hum of the engine, the rush of tires gone. The suffocating weight of pursuit lifted, leaving her adrift in stillness. But silence, true silence, is never gentle. It presses. It thickens. It swells until you hear the thrum of your own pulse, the rasp of every shallow breath, the distant echo of thoughts you cannot push away. Sarah sat motionless behind the wheel, her knuckles pale, her chest rising and falling too fast, as if trying to outrun what she already knew. She had not escaped. She had only crossed into something deeper. The world outside her windows was gone. No road, no void, only mist, soft, gray, endless. It clung to the glass, curling and shifting like smoke. She reached out with trembling fingers, pressed them to the window, and watched the fog beat against her skin, damp and cold. Her throat tightened. She whispered, "Where am I?" No answer came. Not from the air, not from the shadows, but from the passenger seat, where the indentation remained. He was there, invisible, but undeniable. The faint weight of him bent the cushion, as though time itself had taken form beside her. Her body screamed to run, to fling open the door, to flee barefoot into the mist. But her limbs refused. It was not paralysis. It was acceptance. Somewhere in the marrow of her bones, she understood. There was nowhere to go. A sound stirred. Not ahead, not behind. From within, a low rhythm, steady and measured. Not a heartbeat, at least. Not hers. Something older. The sound of footsteps pacing along the corridors of eternity. And then, the voice. Close. Intimate. "Child." Her eyes squeezed shut. Tears spilled hot against her cheeks. "Please," she whispered. "Not yet. Not tonight. Please." A pause. Heavy. Deliberate. When the voice returned, it was neither cruel nor merciful. It was simply true. There is no yet. There is only time. And it is no longer yours. Sarah shook her head violently, clutching the wheel like an anchor. Her breaths came ragged, desperate. Memories rose unbidden, jagged fragments of a life, too ordinary, too unfinished. Coffee cups left half-drained on her kitchen counter. A voicemail from her sister she never returned. The warm laughter of a friend she promised to meet again soon. All of it undone in an instant. She cried out, her voice breaking. "But I didn't live enough. I didn't love enough. Her words dissolved into sobs. The passenger seat shifted. Slowly, inevitably, she felt it. An arm, impossibly light, yet unbearably heavy, draping across her shoulders. The cloak brushed her skin, soft as ash. The air chilled. She froze. Her breath hitched. The embrace was not violent. It was not forced. It was inevitable. Her chest ached as warmth drained from her body, replaced by something still, something vast. It was not pain, it was surrender. Her heartbeat slowed, softened, until it no longer belonged to her alone. The mist outside thickened, curling tighter, pressing against the car until even the outline of the windshield blurred. Her reflection wavered in the glass, her own face fading, and beside it, clearer than ever, the figure cloaked in black. For the first time, Sarah saw him fully. Not grotesque, not monstrous, simply ancient, a presence draped in eternity, with eyes that held neither malice nor mercy. In their depth, she glimpsed every ending the world had ever known, candles guttering in forgotten rooms, ships vanishing beneath endless waves, names etched on headstones, weathered beyond recognition. Her breath caught. She whispered, trembling, "Your death." The figure inclined his head. "I am the end," he murmured. "But I am also the hand that carries, the one who walks beside, the one who waits when all else leaves." His voice sank into her like a lullaby, a truth that chilled and soothed at once. Sarah's tears slowed. Her trembling eased. For the first time since the restroom door closed behind her, she did not resist. "Will it hurt?" she asked softly, her voice small, childlike. The figure's arm tightened gently, as though drawing her closer. "Number, it will only change." Her lips parted in a fragile breath. Her eyes fluttered shut. And then the stillness. The silence was no longer suffocating. It was deep, vast, endless. Her body slackened against the seat, her hands falling away from the wheel. The fog swallowed the car whole. No sound remained but the faint echo of wheels, rolling slow and steady, as though joining an eternal procession, a funeral march that stretched beyond sight. When the mist thinned, the highway was empty once more. No car, no headlights, only the faint wind brushing against the old restroom by the roadside. Its door swung gently on rusted hinges, as though it had never been closed at all. And if you looked closely just for a moment, you might swear you saw him. The old man, cloaked in black, standing at the corner of the lot, patient, still, watching the road, waiting for the next soul who would stop to rest. Story 5. The painting that spoke. You are listening to the stillness of the night, and somewhere in that silence, footsteps echo softly across cobblestones, slick with rain. They belong to James Holloway, a man whose life has been shaped by shadows and canvas, brushstrokes, and oil paint. He is not a painter himself, no. James is something else. He is a collector, a seeker of strange and forgotten things, someone who believes that art is more than pigment and frame. It is memory. It is presence. It is the remnant of something once alive. James spends his days wandering galleries and dusty shops, searching for pieces that others have overlooked. He has money enough to buy comfort, but comfort is not what he craves. What he wants are curiosities, objects that hum with quiet strangeness, that seem to breathe when the room is still. He tells himself it is for passion, for the beauty of the unusual. But those who know him whisper that James collects these things because he is lonely. One evening, as the sky hung heavy with an autumn storm, James found himself walking through a part of the city he rarely visited. The streets there were narrow, the buildings leaning inward as if conspiring with one another. And in the window of a shop half hidden between two shuttered laundries, he saw it. A painting. It leaned against the glass, its frame dull with age, the canvas warped ever so slightly by damp air. The shop was called Mercer's Antiques, a name painted in fading gold above the door. James hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The bell above the door rang weakly, as though tired of being disturbed. The air smelled of dust and varnish, mingled with something faintly metallic. The shop was crowded with relics, carved masks, porcelain figurines, clocks that had long since stopped ticking. But James's eyes were drawn immediately to the painting on the far wall. It showed a man standing on a barren hill. His figure was tall, draped in a dark cloak that blended into the shadows behind him. In his right hand, he held a long knife, the blade catching some imagined light. His face was pale, indistinct, the features blurred by the painter's hand, or perhaps by time itself. And behind him stretched a sky thick with storm clouds. the kind that gather before something terrible happens. James stepped closer, his breath caught in his throat. There was something magnetic about the figure, something that made the air feel thinner around the canvas. He had seen many paintings in his life, but this one felt aware, as though it had been waiting for him. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "You like it?" James turned. Behind the counter stood the shopkeeper, a thin man with a bent back and eyes the color of weak tea. His smile was small, tight, as if unused to being stretched. "It's unusual," James said. The shopkeeper shuffled closer, his shoes whispering across the wooden floor. "Unusual, yes. And old. Too old, some would say. It came from an estate sale outside the city. Belonged to a family with a reputation. To peculiar folk. Superstitious. They kept this painting locked away for years. Said it was cursed." James gave a small laugh. "Cursed paintings sell well at Halloween auctions. People like to be frightened." The shopkeeper's smile did not change. "It's not a decoration, Mr. Holloway." "James Holloway. Mr. Holloway." The shopkeeper's voice lowered, conspiratorial. "That is not a painting for parties or parlors. It speaks." James frowned. "You mean the subject speaks?" The old man leaned in, close enough that James could smell the faint sourness of his breath. "I mean exactly what I say. At night when the world is quiet, the man in that painting whispers. He whispers to anyone who will listen. Some ignored him. Some could not." James stared back at the canvas. The figure's eyes, if they could be called eyes, seemed darker now, deeper. For a moment, James thought he saw the faintest curve of a smile at the edge of that blurred mouth. The shopkeeper straightened. "I should not sell it to you, but you seem drawn." "And how much?" James asked, his voice steadier than he felt. The old man's eyes narrowed. "You don't want to know its price. You want to know its cost." But James only reached for his wallet. "How much?" There was silence then, a silence so heavy James could hear the faint creak of the rafters above. At last, the shopkeeper named a number less than James expected. Too little, in fact, as if the man wanted it gone. The exchange was brief. The painting was wrapped in brown paper, the frame bound with twine. As James lifted it, he felt the weight of it settle into his arms, not heavy in mass, but heavy in presence. At the door, the shopkeeper called after him. "Remember, Mr. Holloway, do not ignore him when he speaks." James stepped out into the rain, the words echoing behind him. "Do not ignore him when he speaks." He told himself it was nonsense, a salesman's trick to make the painting seem more mysterious. And yet, as he carried it home through the slick streets, James could not shake the feeling that the package in his hands was not silent at all, that if he pressed his ear to the paper he might hear a whisper, waiting. At home, James unwrapped the painting carefully, laying the paper aside. The canvas seemed darker in the lamplight than it had in the shop, the figure on the hill more defined. The knife caught the glow of the bulb as though freshly polished. James studied it for a long time, tracing the brushstrokes with his eyes. There was no signature, no date. The paint was cracked in places, but the figure remained vivid, untouched by time, and always, those eyes or what passed for them stared back. He poured himself a glass of wine, sat in his leather chair, and let the storm outside hammer against the windows. For a while, he tried to read, but his gaze kept lifting, drawn again and again to the painting on the wall. It was absurd, he thought, to feel watched by a piece of canvas. Absurd to imagine that the shopkeeper's words had planted something inside his mind. But as the clock ticked toward midnight, James found himself whispering aloud, as though to break the tension. "Well then, if you've something to say, I'm listening." The room was quiet, only the rain, the clock, the soft settling of the house. And yet, James could not shake the sense that silence was not the same as absence, that the man on the hill had heard him, and that one night soon he would answer. The first night passed quietly enough. James had placed the painting above the small fireplace in his bedroom, where it loomed like a window onto some forgotten hillside. He told himself it belonged there, the way collectors always justify their latest acquisition, that it completed the room, that it gave the space character, that it was meant to be seen often, admired, lived with, and so he lived with it. He ate dinner beneath its gaze, sipped wine while reading by lamplight, and finally, when his eyes grew heavy, He switched off the lamp and allowed the painting to fade into darkness with the rest of the room. He slept, but not deeply. The storm outside had weakened into a soft drizzle, and in that stillness, every sound of the old house seemed louder. The creak of timber, the whisper of wind against the glass, the drip of water through a loose gutter. James drifted in and out of dreams, his mind restless. And then, at some uncertain hour, he awoke. At first he thought it was the clock that had stirred him, the faint, steady ticking that sometimes became a drumbeat in his head. But then he realized it was something else. A sound softer than ticking, gentler than the wind, but close, so very close. A whisper. James lay still, his heart quickening. He told himself it was a dream, the remnants of sleep clinging to him like cobwebs. But the longer he listened, the more certain he became. Someone or something was murmuring in the dark. He sat up slowly, straining to hear. The voice was faint, muffled, almost as though it came from behind a door or through the walls themselves. He could not make out the words, only the rhythm of them, the rise and fall of syllables too soft to decipher. His eyes adjusted to the dark. Across the room, the outline of the painting was visible against the wall, darker than the shadows around it. The man on the hill, the knife in his hand, the sky painted thick with storm. James swallowed hard. The shopkeeper's words returned unbidden. "It speaks." "No," James whispered to himself. "No, this is imagination. This is nothing." He rose from bed, his bare feet cold against the wooden floor. He approached the painting, every step measured, as though each creak of the boards might draw the voice out louder. The whispers did not stop. If anything, they grew more distinct, though still not quite intelligible. James leaned closer, until his face was only inches from the canvas. The smell of old oil paint, faint and acrid, filled his nose. "Say it again," James muttered, half daring, half terrified. "If you've something to say it." And then, for the briefest moment, he thought he heard it clearly. 3 words, so soft he wondered if they had formed only in his mind. "Look at me." James jerked back, his breath catching in his throat. He spun, expecting to find someone in the room, someone behind him, whispering at his ear. But the room was empty. Only the chair, the table, the glass of wine now half finished and forgotten. He turned again slowly, to face the painting. The figure was unchanged, standing upon his painted hill, but James could not shake the feeling that the man's head had tilted ever so slightly, that the eyes, blurred though they were, aligned now with James's own. He returned to bed, though sleep did not come easily. For hours he lay awake, listening. The whispers continued, sometimes louder, sometimes faint, always just beyond clarity. Only near dawn, when the first pale light seeped through the curtains, did the sound fade entirely, leaving James uncertain whether it had been real at all. The second night was worse. James had gone about his day in the city as usual. He met with a dealer about a potential auction, lunched with a colleague, browsed yet another gallery, but his thoughts kept returning to the painting. He told himself it was simple curiosity, that the mind plays tricks in the quiet hours. Still, as the sun sank and the streets grew dark, a weight settled over him. When he returned home, the house seemed colder than usual. He poured himself whiskey this time, stronger, sharper, to steady his nerves. And again, he sat in the bedroom, reading beneath the watchful presence of the painting. By midnight, he felt the pull of exhaustion. He left the lamp burning low, unwilling to surrender to full darkness, and drifted into uneasy slumber. It was the whisper that woke him again. Not faint this time, not vague. Clear enough that the hairs on his arms rose at once. "Look at me." James's eyes snapped open. The lamp still glowed faintly, casting the room in amber shadow. He turned his head toward the painting. The man was, as before, cloaked in black, knife in hand. Yet James could not shake the sense that the figure's stance had changed, that the shoulders were squared, the chest broader, the head raised higher. "Look at me." The words were soft, almost kind, but they pulled at him like a command. James sat up, his pulse hammering. "I am looking," he whispered hoarsely. "I see you." "What do you want?" No reply, only silence. And then, as though spoken through the very fibers of the canvas, "You don't see me." James stood quickly, knocking the whiskey glass to the floor. It shattered, amber liquid spilling across the boards. He stepped closer to the painting, glaring into its storm-lit world. "I see enough," he said, but even as he spoke, he wondered if he did. The man's features were blurred, indistinct. The longer James stared, the more the face seemed to shift an outline of cheekbone one moment, the suggestion of hollow eyes the next, always refusing to be fixed. Exhaustion and unease mingled in him, twisting his thoughts. He backed away at last, muttering curses under his breath, and left the room. He slept the rest of the night on the sofa in his study, the whispers following him faintly down the hall, refusing to let go. On the third night, James tried an experiment. He set a recording device on the bedside table, a small digital recorder he often used to capture notes. He left it running as he climbed into bed, determined to prove to himself that nothing unusual was happening, that the whispers were dream, illusion, the tricks of an overtired mind. The night stretched long. The whispers came as expected, curling through the silence like smoke. James lay still, letting them wash over him, even as his body tensed with every syllable. Again and again, he thought he heard the same command: "Look at me." When dawn finally came, he sat up and reached for the recorder with shaking hands. He pressed play, heart racing. At first, only static. The faint hiss of the device left running for hours. Then the rustle of his own movement, the creak of bed springs, the sigh of shifting blankets, and then a whisper, clear, distinct, captured on tape. "Look at me." James froze, the blood draining from his face. The voice was low, rough-edged, not his own. He replayed it again and again, but the words remained unmistakable. His hand trembled as he stopped the recorder. For a long time he sat motionless, the weight of confirmation pressing down on him. This was no dream, no figment. The painting was speaking, and if it could speak, what else could it do? That day, James tried to ignore it. He covered the painting with a sheet, telling himself that if he could not see it, he could not hear it either. He busied himself with calls, with errands, with anything that kept him away from the bedroom. But each time he passed the door, he felt a presence pressing at the other side, a silent demand that he return, uncover, look. By evening, his resolve had frayed. He stood in the doorway, staring at the draped form on the wall. The cloth moved slightly, as though stirred by a draft. James stepped closer, heart hammering. He reached out, fingers brushing the fabric. The air felt colder there, heavier, and then, muffled but still audible, the voice again. "Look at me." James tore the cloth away. The man on the hill stood as always, knife gleaming. Yet James swore the eyes were sharper now, more focused, as though the blur had parted just enough to allow their gaze to pierce through the canvas, through him. He stumbled back, his breath ragged, and in the heavy silence that followed, James realized he could never again pretend this was nothing. The painting was awake, and it wanted to be seen. By the fourth night, James had given up on sleep. He no longer trusted the stillness of the dark. Instead, he sat in the armchair by the fire, glass in hand, eyes fixed on the painting across the room. He told himself that if he kept watch, if he refused to close his eyes, then nothing could happen without him knowing. Nothing could move, nothing could whisper, nothing could change. But the human body is stubborn. The hours bled together, and exhaustion pressed down on him heavier than any blanket. His eyelids fluttered, his chin sank toward his chest, and for a few fragile minutes, he slipped into unconsciousness. When he startled awake, the fire had dwindled to embers. The room was wrapped in a low red glow. His drink had spilled onto the floor, dripping from limp fingers. And the painting was different. The man on the hill stood as always, but the knife was gone. In its place, his hand stretched outward, the fingers long, pale, pointed not to the sky, not to the storm, but to James himself. James froze. His breath came shallow. He rubbed his eyes once, twice, certain that fatigue was tricking him. But when he looked again, the hand was still raised, still pointing, unwavering. Then came the whisper, so close it seemed to crawl along the curve of his ear. "Now you see me." Morning brought no comfort. The daylight fell cold and colorless across the painting. But even then, the man's outstretched hand remained. James circled the room in disbelief, viewing it from every angle, hoping that some trick of perspective explained what he saw. Yet from each side, each distance, the figure's arm extended toward him, the gesture undeniable. It wasn't imagination. The painting had changed. For the first time since he'd brought it home, James considered calling someone. A restorer, perhaps. An expert. Someone who might look at it and say, yes, paint can shift, oils can warp, time can play strange games with canvas. But whom could he call without sounding mad? What scholar of art could explain a voice caught on tape, a whisper in the dead of night? He did nothing. He poured coffee with shaking hands, avoided the bedroom as though it were diseased, and tried to continue his day. But the thought gnawed at him. By afternoon, he found himself returning to the doorway, peering in like a thief at his own possession. The painting hung there in silence, unchanged. The hand pointed. The storm raged. The figure's shadow fell long across the hill. And then, as James stared, he noticed something else, something worse. The face, where once it had been blurred, a vague suggestion of features. Now it seemed sharper, not entirely clear, not yet, but sharper, a jawline emerging from the haze. The curve of a cheek, the faint impression of lips pressed into the beginnings of a smile. James slammed the door shut. 2 days later, he forced himself to test it. He invited a friend, Oliver, under the pretense of showing his latest find. Oliver was no stranger to James's collection, and his eyes lit with curiosity the moment he entered. Another antique? He asked. You always manage to sniff out the strangest pieces. James led him to the bedroom with reluctance, every step heavy. He told himself he needed to know, needed proof. The painting hung bare on the wall. James watched Oliver's face intently, desperate for some reaction, some flicker of recognition. Well? James pressed. Oliver tilted his head. Odd composition. The colors are striking, though muted, but still alive somehow. He stepped closer. The figure, though, strange choice. A man pointing into the room, almost as if he paused, frowning. As if what? James demanded. Oliver leaned nearer to the canvas, squinting. I could swear he's looking straight at us. James's skin prickled. Oliver chuckled nervously. Trick of the brushwork, I suppose. Perspective can be uncanny in old oils. Still, he shivered faintly. I don't much like the way his eyes follow. Gives me the feeling he's watching. Even now. James swallowed hard. You see it then. See what? The changes. Oliver raised a brow. Changes? James hesitated. The words tangled in his throat. If he told the truth, if he spoke of whispers and shifting hands, Oliver would laugh. Or worse, he would pity. And James could not bear pity. Instead, he forced a strained smile. Nothing. Only the atmosphere, perhaps. You're right, it's a curious piece. Oliver nodded, but did not linger. When he left that evening, he gave one last glance toward the painting, his expression troubled. James noticed, and James knew. The distortion was not his alone. That night, the whispers returned, louder than before, no longer muffled. They filled the room as though spoken through hidden mouths in the walls. Look at me. See me. You see me now. James clutched his head, rocking in his chair, muttering to drown them out. But the voices only rose, overlapping, weaving into a chorus that pressed against his skull. He stumbled toward the painting, his voice raw. What do you want from me? The figure's eyes gleamed faintly, catching the lamplight. And then, for the first time, the lips curved upward, no longer blurred suggestion, but a clear, unmistakable smile. James staggered back, horrified. The painting was not simply changing, it was revealing itself, piece by piece, slowly, deliberately, and James knew he had not yet seen the end. The days that followed blurred into one another. James avoided mirrors, avoided windows, for in every reflection he caught, he thought he glimpsed the figure standing just behind him. At first it was only shadows, the outline of a cloak, but then details, the angle of a jaw, the suggestion of eyes, always there, always waiting. He covered the painting again, nailed heavy cloth over it, and tried to pretend, but the whispers seeped through fabric and wood alike. Why hide me? You brought me here. You wanted to see. James shouted back until his voice broke, but silence never lasted. The whispers always returned. And then came the night when he awoke to find the cloth on the floor. He had nailed it tightly, He remembered the strain of the hammer, the way the nails bent against the wood. Yet now, the fabric lay crumpled at the base of the wall, nails scattered like teeth. The painting stared down at him, uncovered, unashamed. The figure's smile had grown, and the hand that pointed at him now reached farther, longer, almost breaching the edge of the canvas itself. James's world narrowed to one thought, one terror, one impossible truth. The painting was no longer content to remain within its frame. It was coming closer. For nearly a week, James had lived in the half-life of someone trapped inside a dream he could not wake from. The days crawled by in anxious haze. The nights collapsed into whispers and shifting shapes. He no longer measured time by sunrise or sunset, but by the sound of the voice when it receded, when it rose, when it seemed to curl around his name with cruel intimacy. The painting loomed over him in every room of the house, not because he carried it, but because his thoughts did. Even when he sat in the kitchen, cup of cold tea untouched, he could feel it, the figure standing on the hill, the eyes sharpening, the lips learning how to smile, the arm stretching outward like a root groping for purchase. He could feel the weight of its attention on his back, even when doors and walls separated them. It watched, it waited, and it whispered. On the seventh night, James reached the edge. The whisper began as usual, soft, almost polite, drifting from the corner of the bedroom where the canvas hung, but it swelled quickly, climbing in volume, until it rattled the glass panes in their frames. Why hide me? You see me. You cannot turn away. The words throbbed against his skull, low and resonant, like the echo of drums deep under the earth. James stumbled from his chair, knocking the lamp sideways, casting the room into flickering shadow. No more, he muttered, clutching at his hair. His voice cracked, brittle with exhaustion. No more, you hear me? I won't let you in. I won't. The painting pulsed in the dark, its storm-clouded sky seeming to ripple, as though stirred by wind that only existed within its frame. The hand had changed again. No longer simply pointing outward, it now gripped the painted horizon, fingers curled over the edge of the canvas, knuckles pressing outward, as if straining against the thin membrane between paint and air. Something was pushing through. James's heart thrashed in his chest. He backed toward the hallway, but then stopped. A strange calm settled over him, brittle but firm, like ice underfoot. He could not keep running. He could not keep pretending. If he wanted his life back, there was only one answer. He had to destroy it. The first attempt was almost laughably desperate. He grabbed the nearest object, a brass candlestick from the mantel, and swung it at the canvas. The blow struck square, ringing with a hollow thud. The frame rattled on the wall, dust showering down, but the canvas remained unmarred. James struck again, and again. The candlestick bent in his hand, warped like tin. He dropped it with a cry, staring at the painting. Not a single tear, not even a scuff. The figure inside had changed once more. Its smile had widened. James tore through the house like a man possessed, searching for tools. He found a hatchet in the cellar, relic of some previous tenant. His hands trembled as he gripped it, the wooden handle slick with sweat. He marched back upstairs, dragging each step with grim resolve. The whispers followed him, now amused, mocking, as though the voice knew exactly what he intended. Break me? It purred. Try. It's... James raised the hatchet high, his muscles straining, and brought it down with all the fury of his fear. The blade struck, but instead of ripping through cloth and paint, it sank, deeper, too deep. The canvas yielded not like fabric but like flesh, swallowing the axe head nearly to the handle. James gasped and wrenched backward, but the tool was stuck fast, as if embedded in stone. The painting shivered. The surface rippled outward like water disturbed by a stone. And from within the canvas came the sound, the sickening scrape of something shifting closer, dragging itself toward the thin veil that separated it from James. A laugh rose from the canvas, not whispered, not subtle, but full, rich, and terrifyingly human. James staggered back, his chest heaving. Panic surged through him. He grabbed a box of matches from the hearth, struck one with shaking hands, and hurled it against the canvas. Flame licked the surface eagerly, racing across the cloth. For the first time, James felt a surge of triumph, but the fire did not consume. The colors grew brighter. Yes, the reds deeper, the shadows darker, the whites like lightning cracks across a stormy sky. The fire sank into the painting, feeding it, strengthening it, until the storm within the frame looked alive with lightning and smoke. And then, impossibly, the match flame died in his hand. The room grew darker. The only light left was the glow radiating from the canvas itself. James collapsed to his knees, sobbing into his palms. Why? Why me? The answer came gently, almost lovingly, curling through the dark like a lullaby. You chose me. And James remembered the market stall, the strange weight of the dealer's gaze, the words whispered under breath as he purchased the piece. It will choose you back. He hadn't understood. He hadn't wanted to. But now he did. He had not bought the painting. The painting had claimed him. Something shifted in the corner of his vision. He looked up, numb with terror. The hand, the one gripping the edge of the canvas, was longer now. The fingers stretched inches into the room, pale and jointed, each nail glinting faintly in the glow. The fabric of reality bulged around them, trembling as if under strain. And for the first time, James realized the painting would not need to change much more. Not much longer now. Soon, the man on the hill would no longer be confined. Soon, he would step out. James screamed and tore at the canvas with his bare hands, clawing until his fingernails split, until blood streaked the surface. But the more he tore, the more the painting seemed to absorb. His blood vanished into the paint, streaks turning into new shades of crimson within the storm. The figure's lips parted, teeth gleamed in the darkness of the smile, and the voice, low and satisfied, whispered one word, closer. That night, neighbors would later recall hearing something strange from James's house. Not the usual creaks or muffled arguments of the street, but something else, low thuds, the crash of furniture, and once, a scream that seemed to stretch into silence too long to be natural. None of them went to investigate, and by morning, the house was quiet again. But James knew. The breaking point had come, and he had failed to break it. Night fell heavier than usual. The street outside James's home lay in silence, its lamps dimmed to a faint amber haze. It was the kind of stillness that seemed manufactured, as if the world itself had paused, waiting for something to happen. Inside the house, James sat slumped against the wall opposite the painting. His body trembled. Though the air was neither cold nor warm, it was simply absent of temperature, absent of anything familiar. His nails were broken, fingertips raw, thin lines of blood dried on his palms. The scent of iron clung faintly to the air, mixing with the older smell of turpentine and varnish that seemed to seep from the painting. He could no longer distinguish the hours. He no longer cared. Time had become meaningless, a trick played by the clock on his mantel that ticked and ticked but never seemed to advance. And always, there was the voice, softer now, not cruel but coaxing like a lullaby whispered to a restless child. Closer, James. Do not resist. It is easier this way. Look at me. Only me. James lifted his head. He should have turned away, but his eyes betrayed him, dragging themselves upward to the frame that dominated the wall. The painting no longer resembled art. The storm was alive, clouds rolling and flashing with light that had no source. The hill stretched out in impossible depth, its grass shifting in spectral wind. And the figure, the figure had changed entirely, no longer a distant silhouette. He stood in the foreground now, shoulders broad beneath the black cloak, head tilted slightly as though amused by James's reluctance. The knife was gone, forgotten. The hand once raised in gesture now stretched out of the frame entirely, long fingers curling toward James as if offering an invitation. And the face, for the first time, James saw it clearly, pale, angular, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly like embers under ash. The smile was not wicked, not monstrous. It was gentle, almost tender, and that frightened James more than anything else, because it was not the smile of a stranger. It was the smile of someone who knew him. James tried to speak, but his throat had tightened, his tongue heavy. All he could manage was a hoarse whisper. Why me? The answer came, soft and patient. Because you looked. The words sank into his bones. He thought of the marketplace, the way his hand had lingered over the frame, the strange urge he could not explain. He thought of how he had carried it home, unwrapping it like a secret gift, treasuring it before even hanging it. The painting had never been silent. It had been waiting, waiting for him to choose, and now it had chosen back. James tried to stand, to run, but his legs betrayed him. They moved without command, slowly, steadily, carrying him forward one step at a time. The floorboards creaked beneath his weight, echoing like distant thunder. The figure's hand extended further, each step James took drawing it out into the room. The canvas rippled, stretched, bulged, but did not break. The hand was no longer paint, no longer shadow. It was solid, pale, cold, the fingers twitching with anticipation. The closer James came, the quieter the world grew. The tick of the mantel clock faded. The distant hum of the city vanished. Even the pounding of his heart grew soft, as though muffled under layers of cloth. Only the voice remained. "Do not fear. You were always meant for this. Come closer. Let us finish." James stopped, mere inches from the canvas. The hand hovered before him, waiting, not forcing, simply offering. And James, broken, exhausted, terrified yet oddly calm, lifted his own hand in reply. His fingers shook, reaching out across the space between. When their skin met, the temperature dropped. Not cold like winter air, but a deep absolute cold, like the bottom of the ocean where light has never touched. James gasped as it coursed through him, yet he could not pull away. The grip tightened, firm but not cruel, pulling him gently toward the canvas. The surface rippled again, shimmering like liquid glass, and then, slowly, James began to sink through. The sensation was unlike anything he had imagined. Not pain, not even resistance. It was as though he were dissolving into the paint, his body unspooling into strokes of color and texture. His chest burned, his lungs fought, but the hand pulled him steadily forward, deeper and deeper into the storm. Behind him, the room faded, the walls dissolved, the ceiling vanished, the hearth shrank into nothing but a dim blur. Ahead of him, the hill stretched vast and endless, wind whipping across the grass. The figure stood waiting, now whole, now smiling, as if to welcome him home. James stumbled onto the painted soil. The hand released him, but he did not fall. He stood, trembling, staring at the man in black. "Where am I?" His voice sounded strange, thinner, distant. The man's smile widened. "With me." From the other side of the frame, the house was quiet. The painting hung as it always had, centered neatly on the wall. Only now, the figure upon the hill was not alone. A second man stood beside him, slightly hunched, pale-faced, with eyes wide in eternal disbelief. His expression captured not in brushstrokes, but in something far more real, far more alive. James had joined the collection. And if one were to lean close enough, if one dared to press an ear against the painted canvas, they might hear the faintest whisper carried on the painted wind. "Help me." Weeks later, the house stood silent. Neighbors assumed James had left town. His curtains never moved. His lights never glowed. Eventually, the property was listed for sale, and a new owner came to inspect it. He walked from room to room, humming softly, until his eyes caught the painting. He stopped, transfixed, leaning closer. The dealer's warning voice might have echoed through centuries. "It will choose you back." The man smiled faintly, reaching out to touch the frame. And somewhere, in the storm on the hill, James screamed, but no one heard. Story 6. The Watcher. You are lying in bed now, perhaps with the lights already dimmed. Your room is quiet, still, familiar. But sometimes, in the hours when the night deepens, familiarity can play tricks. The walls you've known for years, the hum of the refrigerator, the sigh of the floorboards, they start to feel different. They start to feel alive. Tonight, I'll tell you a story. It's not the kind of story that leaps at you with sudden screams or dripping shadows. No, this one is slower, softer, like a whisper pressed against the back of your neck. It's the story of Emily. Emily was an ordinary woman with an ordinary job in an ordinary city. She worked in an office where the days blurred together. The clicking of keyboards, the hiss of the coffee machine, the endless shuffle of paper. And when the sun sank beyond the skyline, she returned to her small apartment on the edge of town. Her home was simple, modest, yet comforting in its quiet way. She had decorated it with a few framed photographs, a stack of well-worn books, and a single potted plant that never seemed to thrive but also never died. At night, she liked to switch on a little amber lamp by the sofa and let its glow soften the corners of the room. She lived alone, and most nights she was content with that. She enjoyed the silence, the absence of demands, the way she could listen to the hush of her own breath without interruption. But lately, something had begun to trouble her. It wasn't anything she could prove, or even describe, just a feeling, a sensation, that she was not as alone as she believed. Sometimes it came as she turned the key in her door, and she thought she could hear another breath behind her. Sometimes it brushed across her skin as she walked through the hallway, as if invisible eyes were resting there, watching her pass. She told herself it was nothing, a trick of her mind. Everyone feels that way now and then, but feelings, once noticed, have a way of growing. The first true incident came on a Wednesday evening. Emily had been late leaving work, her head heavy with numbers and deadlines. She carried a bag of groceries up the stairs, unlocked her door, and stepped inside. At first, everything was normal. The same faint smell of coffee lingering in the air, the same quiet shuffle of her slippers against the wooden floor. She set the groceries down, switched on the lamp, and glanced around the living room. And that's when she noticed the chair. Her old armchair, the one by the window, was angled slightly differently, just a few inches, just enough that it no longer faced the corner but seemed turned, as though someone had been sitting there, watching the front door, waiting. Emily froze. The groceries hung heavy in her hands. She listened to the apartment, to the silence. Nothing. After a while, she exhaled, shook her head, and muttered to herself, "I must have moved it earlier. I just didn't notice." She put the groceries away, made herself tea, and tried to forget the unease that prickled across her shoulders. But of course, once you've begun to suspect, once the thought has rooted itself, the smallest things become evidence. Over the next week, Emily began to notice details. The bathroom mirror had a faint smudge across it, shaped like a fingerprint, though she hadn't touched it. A book on the coffee table lay open to a page she didn't remember reading. The curtains seemed to sway even when the windows were closed. And then, one night, the sound began. She was drifting into sleep when she heard it, a soft creak, distant but clear, from the living room. Her eyes snapped open in the dark. She held her breath, straining to listen. Creak, pause, creak, the sound of footsteps, moving slowly across her floor. Emily sat up, her pulse pounding. She wanted to believe it was the building settling, the old wood shifting under the weight of silence. But the sound had a rhythm, a pattern, like someone walking. After several minutes, it stopped. She lay awake until morning, her body tense, her ears wide open. The next day, after work, she bought a small surveillance camera, just a simple device she could place on the bookshelf, pointing toward the living room, a precaution, a reassurance. That night she set it up, adjusted the angle, and whispered to herself, "Just to prove I'm imagining things." And for the first time in days, she slept. When morning came, she poured herself coffee and sat down to review the footage. At first it was boring, ordinary, hours of stillness. The lamp glowing faintly, the curtains unmoving, the clock ticking. She fast-forwarded through it, half smiling at her own paranoia. But then, around 3 in the morning movement, her breath caught. A shadow entered the frame. Not hers, not anyone she knew. A man. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured as he stepped softly into the room. He paused, his head turning slowly, as though drinking in every detail of her home. Then, after a moment, he walked calmly toward the hallway. Out of sight, Emily's hands trembled. She stopped the recording, rewound, watched it again. The man was there, inside her home, while she slept. I'll pause here, because you, lying there in your own bed, may be wondering, how certain are you, really, that you're alone? Sometimes, when the night is quietest, the quiet itself can be the loudest warning. And for Emily, this was only the beginning. Emily stared at the paused frame on her laptop. The figure was blurred by the grain of the night vision, yet unmistakably human. The outline of shoulders, the tilt of a head, the unmistakable weight of presence. Her first thought was that it must be a trick, a glitch, a shadow cast by headlights from the street. She wanted to believe that, needed to believe that. So she rewound again, watched closely. The man stepped into the frame from the far left. The movement was fluid, deliberate, as though he knew exactly where he was going. His hand grazed the back of the armchair. His head tilted upward, almost listening, almost savoring the silence of her apartment. And then he turned and walked directly toward the hallway, toward the door that led to her bedroom. Emily felt her stomach twist. She fast-forwarded, heart pounding. The recording continued in its quiet rhythm, but the man never came back out. The screen showed an empty living room until morning light began to seep through the curtains. She slammed the laptop shut. The air felt heavy, as though the walls were pressing closer. She told herself there had to be an explanation. Maybe the footage was old. Maybe someone had spliced in another recording. Maybe she'd set up the camera wrong. But the words that echoed through her mind were simpler. He went down the hall, and she had been asleep at the end of that hallway. At work that day, she barely heard her colleagues. Their voices came and went like static, their faces pale blurs above their desks. Every sound seemed sharper, every shadow deeper. When her phone rang, she jumped so violently that papers scattered across her desk. She told no one. How could she? To say it aloud would make it real. Instead, when the evening came and she returned to her apartment, she set the camera up again. Same angle, same glow of the lamp. She whispered under her breath, almost a prayer. Show me nothing tonight, please. The hours dragged. She couldn't sleep, though she lay in bed with her eyes shut. Every creak made her muscles lock. Every passing car set her heart racing. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her. When dawn arrived, she sat before the laptop once more. Play, the early hours, showed nothing unusual, but around 2:47 a.m., the camera flickered. And then, there he was again. The man stepped into the frame slowly, as if savoring the moment. He moved closer this time, pausing before the bookshelf, tilting his head as though reading the spines of her books. He lingered there, hand brushing the edges of photographs, fingertips gliding across the frame of her lamp. And then, he turned. For the first time, his face tilted toward the camera. The image was grainy, the features indistinct, but Emily could make out the faint curve of a mouth, not neutral, not grim, but smiling. She slammed the pause button, heart racing. The silence in her apartment now seemed deafening. She wanted to flee, to pack her things and never return. But fear held her frozen. Instead, she clicked forward. The man lifted something into the frame, a small black box. He turned it over in his hands, tilting it toward the lens. Emily's stomach dropped when she recognized it. It was the camera. The recording jolted sideways, then went black. Emily sat in the dim glow of the morning, the coffee in her hand shaking so violently she nearly spilled it. The footage had ended abruptly, which meant he had found the camera, which meant he knew she was watching. Her breath came in shallow gasps. The ordinary apartment around her now felt like a stage set, a thin facade behind which something monstrous was waiting. She forced herself to breathe, to think logically. Perhaps she should call the police. But what could she say? That she had blurry footage of a man in her apartment, that he had disappeared down her hallway, yet she had never seen him leave. They would think she was dreaming, or worse, that she had staged it herself. So instead, she decided on something else. She would set up another camera, two, this time, one in the living room, one in the hallway, hidden better. If he returned, she would have proof. The night stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Emily barely moved from her bed, her eyes wide in the darkness. Her ears caught every shift, every groan of the building, every tick of the clock. And then, there it was, a sound, a faint rustle, softer than breath, coming from the living room. She held still, afraid even to turn her head. Minutes crawled past, each one swollen with dread. Finally, silence returned. When morning came, she rushed to her laptop, heart thudding, palms damp. The first camera showed him again, the same dark figure, entering her living room, moving slowly, savoring every inch. This time he paused at the armchair once more and sat down. Emily felt her throat close. She watched him lower himself into the chair, fold his hands in his lap, and simply sit for minutes, for nearly an hour, as though he were waiting for her. Then, as before, he rose and walked toward the hallway. Emily clicked to the second camera, breath sharp. There he was, stepping into the hall. His movements were smooth, unhurried. He glanced briefly toward her bedroom door, then continued down the hall until he stood directly in front of the second camera. He leaned closer, so close that the screen filled with shadow, with the blurred outline of a mouth stretching into that same faint smile. And then, softly, his lips moved. The recording carried no sound, but Emily could read the shape of the words. "I see you." Emily snapped the laptop shut, her chest heaving. It felt as though the apartment were closing in around her, walls tightening like a fist. For the rest of that day, she couldn't shake the feeling that every surface was watching. The glossy reflection of the television, the dark screen of her phone, even the glass of her window seemed to hold a depth, a shimmer, like eyes staring back. And always in the back of her mind, one thought circled like a vulture. If he could see her camera, then he could see her too. This was no longer paranoia. This was a game, and she had the sinking certainty that the game was only just beginning. There is a peculiar quality to fear that comes from being seen. It is not the heart racing of surprise, nor the sharp shock of pain. It is quieter, more intimate. It sits behind the ribs and rewrites the map of a room. Where light once settled, darkness deepens. Where a chair used to be merely furniture, it becomes a possible vantage point. The ordinary becomes suspect, the safe becomes porous, and every surface waits, waiting as if for permission to reveal what it holds. For Emily, the cameras had begun as a promise to herself, a small, sensible instrument meant to return the world to a ledger of facts. 2 lenses, 2 perspectives. She would collect evidence, stitch it together, and stitch herself back into calm. Instead, the footage had offered her only more questions. The figure in the living room, the slow, deliberate passages down the hallway, the close approach to the second camera, the unsmiling smile. Each replay rearranged her certainty until she felt oddly unmoored, like a house set down on a different foundation. She stopped sleeping in earnest. She slept in fits and spasms. When slumber took her, it came flung and thin, and each time she woke there was a small, cold revelation. The plant by the window had been nudged. The book that had been open on a certain page now lay closed. A cushion sat at an angle she could not recall leaving it. Small changes, barely perceptible, but they accumulated, like pebbles in a shoe. They made walking painful. One night, toward the end of a long string of such nights, Emily rose from bed with a clarity sharpened by desperation. She would no longer be reactive. She would not simply record and watch. She would seek to understand. She brewed coffee with methodical hands, the steam rising and fogging the glass of the kitchen door. She dressed slowly in the same sweater she favored for its familiarity, its seams worn to the same comfortable thread. She gathered what she thought she would need: extra chargers, a power bank, a spare camera, her phone, a small flashlight. She moved like someone preparing to face a storm because, in her mind, that was what awaited behind the closed bedroom door. The apartment had the pallid light of pre-dawn when she switched on the first camera and, instead of going back to bed, she carried her laptop to the doorway and rested it against the frame, watching the live feed with a focus that felt almost clinical. The cameras gave her angles she hadn't considered before: the way the hallway cut a pale corridor through the warm clutter of evening, the shadow under the bookshelf, the little triangle of floor behind the armchair, usually filled with stray knitting yarn or a magazine. She watched those places like a geologist watches for tremors. Hours passed, with nothing but the tick of the mantel clock. At some point, through a haze of drowsiness and brittle alertness, she began to notice a new wrinkle to the phenomenon: the pattern of his visits. They didn't come every night at the same hour. They did not follow the pulse of the city. They arrived when the apartment fell into a certain quality of stillness, not the shallow pause of ordinary rest, but a deeper, more absolute quiet where even the radiator seemed to draw breath more softly. He arrived when things had stopped moving completely, when the hush was so whole you could almost hear the apartment thinking. On the screen, around 3 in the morning, the living room shifted. A shadow detached itself from the corner and walked with that same measured calm across the carpet. He checked the bookshelf. He traced the edge of the lamp's shade. And, on the second camera, he stood for a long while looking at the doorway to the bedroom as if listening for the small noises a sleeping person makes: the half-held sigh, the twitch of a toe beneath a blanket. He waited, as if time were an ingredient he might taste. Emily watched this and felt, with a clarity that surprised her, that the man was not an intruder in the sense she had always imagined. He did not move clumsily, nor did he bruise the space with his presence. He inhabited the apartment with the ease of someone who had known it before. The thought came to her unbidden and cold. Perhaps he had been here all along, in ways she had never allowed herself to perceive. The photographs on the wall, the faint discoloration beneath the radiator, the hollow in the carpet where a foot had once rested, maybe those were markers of a presence that never fully left. She closed the laptop, then opened it again. She watched the footage at half speed. At one point the frame stuttered, and for a breathless second the image doubled. Her living room and, behind its glassy overlay, a second scene entirely. In that borrowed, echoing frame, she saw not just the man but an arrangement of reflections and sights that mapped out the apartment in a way she had not realized could be mapped. The dark gleam of a spoon on the kitchen counter, the slight shimmer of a photo frame, the narrow slit of light under the bedroom door. It was as if his perceptions, the way he looked at rooms, the routes his gaze favored, had left a pattern on the air, a breadcrumb trail she could, with patient listening, begin to follow. The revelation arrived quietly, in the half-light of a morning when concrete rain had left the street smelling of cold iron. After another night of watching the feed and sleeping in 20-minute snatches, she stumbled upon a detail that did not feel accidental. Rewinding footage, watching frame after frame, she saw that whenever he neared a reflective surface, a window, a frame, the black glass of a turned-off television, he would pause and raise his face, not to look at himself but to look through the reflection, to use it as a periscope into places he could not otherwise see. It was not merely voyeurism, it was a practice, a way of turning the apartment into a lattice of sightlines. Her mind traced the logic slowly, as if constructing a machine from spare parts. If he used reflections, then mirrors might be windows into his vantage points. If he repositioned cushions and chairs, then those changes were not fumbled movements but deliberate adjustments to improve sightlines. If he moved photographs by the mantel, perhaps he was rearranging frames to capture different angles to lay out a grid of sight that ensured he could see the bedroom when he could not come inside. The apartment, in other words, had been converted into a set of observatories, each modest object tuned to a larger geometry of watching. The knowledge hit her not like horror but like a chill. He was making the apartment itself his apparatus. No door was forced, no lock was broken. Rather than entry, he perfected presence. He turned the rooms into a network of looking, and from that network a kind of map of her life unfolded, detailed and intimate. Armed with this idea, Emily shifted tactics. She began to consider the apartment as if it were a transparent object. She walked through it with fresh eyes, noting the angles where light pooled, the shadows that gathered, the subtle ways her furniture directed sightlines. She tested reflections, angling a spoon, angling a picture frame, moving a lamp. Each time she altered something, she watched how the change modified the view on the camera. She stubbed toes and laughed to herself in the dim, absurd relief of making small experiments. In doing so, she began to feel a degree of agency return to her, a slender, brittle thread that might, with patience, be woven into something stronger. On a rain-sheened afternoon, she placed an old mirror, a thrift shop piece with a narrow gilt frame, not by the bedroom, but tucked in at the corner of the hallway at a height that caught the reflection of the sofa and the lower half of the bedroom door. She adjusted it so that, even when she stood in the kitchen, if she glanced into the mirror, she would see the faint outline of the bedroom doorway, a slivered image, dim and indirect. It was clumsy and obvious, but it was something. It was a countermeasure, small and human, and imperfect. That night she left 2 phones, one with the camera feed, one to call if necessary within reach. She placed a chair at an angle she had arranged precisely, so that if anyone sat in the living room and tilted their head, the reflection would catch the silhouette of the hallway. She layered the space with tiny, very human devices, a low battery-powered lamp left burning in the hall, an extra blanket flung on the arm of the chair to show the movement of air. These were not weapons, but they were signs. They were small markers in the topology of her home. When the man came, as of course he came, he always came at that particular hour when the hush of the building sank to a thick, velvety quiet, he moved with the same measured calm. He entered the living room and his shoulders eased as if he had found a place he expected to find empty. He checked the books, his fingers brushing titles with absent care. He sat, as he often did, in the armchair and folded his hands. He waited. Emily watched from the laptop via the hallway mirror's second-order reflection. The angle was awkward. The image was indirect and grainy. But indirectly, she could see him looking not at the door but at the space between, at the geometry she had arranged. For a long while he sat there and did not move. Then he glanced up, and through the double reflection, through the small gilt mirror's view into the hallway, Emily caught the smallest gesture. A little nod, almost imperceptible, a recognition, as if her crude mirror had given away the secret of a hidden sightline he had been using. Anger that had long lain wrapped thin inside fear rose like hot reflux. She should have called the police. She should have fled. But fury steadied her hands. She had built a web of watchfulness, and now, she thought, she would bait it. Carefully, she opened a browser and set the camera to record not only to her cloud account but to a separate external drive, a redundant archive. She reset notifications to alert her to motion, to sounds above a whisper. She configured the app to send copies of every clip to a friend's dropped folder, a witness even if she could not be one herself. She took notes, slow, punctilious, as if she were cataloging the operations of something that would need to be explained in a court or in a diary. Times, small alterations in pattern, the angle of a head, the way a sleeve caught the light. And then, when the night came again, she did something more daring. She left the bedroom door cracked a mere inch. Not enough for an intruder to slip through with ease, not enough for comfort, but enough that a figure tall and certain could, if he desired, peer through the split and catch the pale curve of her cheek in sleep. She lay down on the sofa instead, eyes open like a hawk, laptop balanced on her knees, the reflection of the screen painting her face in ghostly light. For the first time in many nights, it felt almost like waiting for an appointment, rather than for terror. She felt iron at her back and slow, legal patience in her fingers. He arrived not long into the dark. As always, he moved slowly, precise, the character of a long practice in unspooling small private rituals. He paused at the bookcase, rotated the ash of a cigarette he had never smoked, traced the rim of the lamp. Then he sat, folded his hands in his lap, and for a long time he simply watched. He watched the geometry of the room he had patiently constructed for himself. He watched the small gilt mirror in the hallway and the sliver of the bedroom door it now offered. He watched the sofa where she lay with her eyes open. Then, with a motion that was not abrupt so much as decisive, he rose and stepped toward the hallway. He glanced at the mirror's angle. He hesitated. He moved again, and when he came into its indirect view, his face was visible for a stark second, pale where the lamp's light had not yet filled the corridor, a mouth at half-smile. Emily felt her breath hitch. She pressed a hand against the laptop trackpad until it throbbed. Motion notification lit the corner of the screen. A recorded clip began to upload automatically to the cloud and to the drive she had placed in her coat basket. She watched the man reach the edge of the gilt frame's view, and then lean just enough, a mere tilt of the head, for the mirror's dim reflection to slice through the dark and catch a sliver of sunlight it did not yet have. In that sliver she saw him tilt his head, as if listening for the small rhythm of sleep. He listened for the tiny identity of breath, and then he spoke, not aloud. That would have been too brisk, too easy. He spoke into the topology itself, the world of reflections, by shifting his position so that a certain set of angles met: the mirrored sliver, the polished television screen, the black glass of the turned-off tablet. The speech was a geometry, a meaning conveyed by placement rather than sound. He framed her without raising his voice. The message was as clear as a whisper at her ear. I see you. I have always seen you. Emily understood then, in a way that bypassed logic, that her home had been an instrument long tuned before she ever noticed it. She had not been observed in simple terms. She had been orchestrated. His visits were measurements. His small rearrangements were calibrations. The mirror had not been a mirror. It had been a lens in a larger machine of patient looking. For a moment, something like clarity rose through the fear. He liked to be seen without being seen. He preferred, it seemed, the slow terror of someone discovering their life is legible. He was a cartographer of intimacy, mapping private movements like coastlines and tides. When the man finally left that night, he did so without hurrying. He walked down the hallway and vanished as if into the architecture itself. Emily sat very still afterward, the laptop cooling against her knees, the recording humming its soft, reliable promise of proof. She felt raw, exposed, like someone who had read through a private ledger of their days and found annotations written by a stranger. She understood, with awful clearness, that the next step would not be to hide or to flee. The next step would be to draw a line on paper and stand on one side of it. The next step would be to make the unseen visible, not by camera alone, but by the full labor of human testimony. She would find someone who would look at the footage and not say she was hysterical. She would make a chain of witnesses and lights. She would refuse the quiet the man preferred. She would, in a sense, begin to shine, and in that thought, terrible, stubborn, necessary, she found a small spur of comfort. It was as though deciding to be seen back could unthread his mat. It was a hope, thin and precarious, but it was a hope nonetheless. There comes a moment when watching is no longer enough. For days, perhaps weeks, Emily had lived in the strange twilight of anticipation, half awake, half dreaming, forever alert to the possibility of another shadow drifting through her living room. Each recording confirmed what she already knew. He came when silence deepened, when the stillness of the apartment was thick enough to swallow thought. But knowing did not blunt the fear. It sharpened it, honed it into something that lived in her chest, like a shard of glass. Sleep no longer carried her. She drifted only in shallow pools, waking at the faintest creak of the floor, the whisper of pipes behind the wall, the soft groan of wood settling into itself. Even the warmth of her blanket felt temporary, provisional, as though it too might betray her by shifting in the dark. One evening, long before the sky had faded, she sat with her laptop open, staring at the frozen image of the man's face, pale, indistinct, caught by the cruel grain of the camera. The longer she looked, the more she felt the weight of his gaze pressing outward, as if the pixels themselves were aware of her. It was not simply a picture, it was contact. And so, Emily reached her breaking point. She made a decision, quietly, the way a match decides to burn when struck. She would not simply wait to be seen again. She would not be mapped and measured like a specimen in a glass cage. She would turn the act of watching back upon him. She would risk stepping into his geometry, his web of sight, and let him know she was not only aware but awake. That night, she prepared differently. She did not arrange cushions as signals, nor mirrors as crude countermeasures. Instead, she stripped the apartment of small clutter, leaving surfaces bare, erasing the signs of her presence as best she could. She wanted the rooms to feel hollow, uninhabited, an empty stage. Only in the bedroom did she leave a suggestion of herself. The quilt pulled neatly, a pillow indented just enough to mimic the curve of a sleeping head, a faint outline, a decoy. Then she placed her chair in the hallway, where the faint gilt-framed mirror gave her an angled view into the living room. The laptop balanced on her knees, her body rigid with both dread and resolve. She waited. The hours passed slowly. The street outside fell quiet. A dog barked once, far off. The radiator hissed and fell silent. And then at last the pattern she had come to recognize. A density in the air, a pause in the fabric of sound. The apartment seemed to hold its breath. On the screen he appeared, not suddenly, but with that same terrible calm. The man stepped into view from the corner of the living room, the shape of his coat shifting like water around him. He did not hurry. He did not stumble. He moved as though he belonged, as though each step had been rehearsed. Emily's hands gripped the sides of the laptop. Her breath came shallow, careful, measured. She wanted him to look toward the bedroom, toward the decoy she had made, and he did. Slowly, his head tilted, his body angled. He studied the faint rise of quilt, the hollow of the pillow. He lingered there, as if savoring the quiet. For a moment, she thought it might end as before, a silent visitation, a measured retreat. But then, for the first time, he moved differently. He approached the bedroom door. He reached out. The knob turned in his hand. Emily's heart struck hard against her ribs. She wanted to shout, to leap up, to crash into the geometry he had so carefully arranged. But she held herself still, caught between terror and strategy. The door creaked open a fraction. The man leaned his head inside. He saw the quilt, the pillow. He listened, and then he turned. He looked not at the bed, not at the room, but at the mirror. Emily felt it before she fully understood. His gaze traveled across the apartment's angles, across the dim reflection of the gilt frame, through the camera's lens, and into the exact place where she Saturday. It was not guesswork. It was precision. He had known. He had always known. The recognition was unbearable. Her skin prickled with heat, her chest clenched, her throat ached with the urge to scream, and still she did not move. She sat frozen in the chair, laptop trembling against her knees, while on the screen his mouth curved into the faintest suggestion of a smile. The geometry had folded back on itself. She was not the observer. She was not even the observed. She was simply inside the mechanism he had built, as inevitable as a moth circling a flame. He did not enter further. He did not need to. After a long, slow moment, he stepped back from the door, closed it gently, and drifted once more into the living room shadows. Emily's breath finally tore free in ragged gasps. She slammed the laptop shut, though the screen burned behind her eyes. She knew, with the clarity of someone standing at the edge of collapse, that the time for patience had ended. The game of reflections, of quiet signals and silent maps, could not hold any longer. This was the breaking point. The ambient hum rises, then slowly fades to near silence, leaving only the narrator's final words, hushed and even. And Emily, trembling in the half-light of her hollow apartment, understood that she could no longer wait to be seen. She would have to choose, to vanish, or to confront the one who had made her home into a cage of eyes. Emily did not sleep that night. She could not. Even after she closed the laptop, even after she unplugged the camera, the shape of him lingered in her mind the way his eyes had found her, precise as a compass, as though she had never been hidden at all. Morning light crept pale and thin across her blinds, but it did nothing to soften the memory. It only showed her more clearly the emptiness of the apartment. The kitchen gleamed faintly, untouched. The living room was stripped of clutter, hollowed. The bed, still made from her decoy, looked foreign. She had crafted a stage for him, and now the performance was finished. She told herself she would leave. She rehearsed it silently as she dressed, as she pulled on her coat, as she stepped outside. Leave the city, leave the job, leave this place behind. But as she walked down the narrow street, she felt it again, the same weight pressing on her spine, the same knowledge that sight followed her. No matter how far she went, the geometry was still intact. He had already drawn her into it. She was already part of the design. Days blurred into each other. She avoided the laptop. She avoided the mirror. Yet each night, lying in the fragile dark, she felt the air thicken, the stillness deepen, until she was sure he was there again, somewhere close, breathing in rhythm with her own. And then, one night, the silence broke. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. A single message. No number, no name, only words. I know you saw me, and I know you're awake. Emily sat upright, her pulse thundering. She stared at the glow of the screen, at the stark letters burning into the dark. Slowly, her eyes shifted to the doorway. It was open. She was certain she had closed it. She always closed it. The air felt colder, not like the chill of night, but like the breath of something standing just beyond the threshold. She listened. Nothing. No step. No whisper. Only the faint buzz of the phone in her hand. She wanted to call someone, a friend, the police. Anyone, but the thought dissolved as another message appeared. You don't need to run. I'm already here. Her throat closed around a cry. She forced herself to move, to swing her legs over the side of the bed. The floor felt icy beneath her feet. Step by step, she edged toward the door, heart hammering, breath shallow, and then she froze. From the corner of the bedroom, where shadow pooled deepest, came the sound. Not loud, just a slow, deliberate inhale, a patient exhale, the rhythm of someone sharing her air. Emily did not scream. She did not flee. She stood there, trembling, as the realization spread through her like frost. The apartment had never been empty. The cameras had never shown the whole picture. He had not only been watching, he had been waiting. She raised the phone again, her hand shaking. The screen flickered with one final message. Look behind you. Emily turned, and whatever she saw, the listeners will never know, because the story ends here, in the hush before the answer. The sound of her breath, sharp and broken, the faint creak of floorboards beneath weight not her own, and then silence. Pause. The ambient wind hum fades almost completely, leaving only a whisper of static, like the breath of an old radio. Perhaps she ran. Perhaps she vanished. Perhaps she is still in that apartment, standing very still, as you lie in your bed tonight. And if you ever wake in the quiet hours, feeling that press of eyes upon your back, remember, it may not be your imagination. It may be your turn. The mole on the chin. Mia had been dreaming of him for weeks. Not once, not twice, but each night, in the quiet hours when the world outside her window thinned to shadow and sigh, the same face would appear. His eyes were steady, unblinking, watching from the half-light of her sleep. His mouth tilted into a faint, unsettling smile, and on his chin, unmistakable, was the mole, small, dark, insistent, like a mark drawn with purpose. Each dream began the same way. She would stand on the edge of a street she didn't recognize, the fog curling low along the asphalt. The smell of wet concrete mixed with something faintly metallic, a copper taste that lingered on the back of her tongue even when she awoke. The man would appear at the far end of the street, hands tucked into the pockets of a coat too long for him, collar turned up against the cold. He never spoke at first. He simply looked, and Mia felt her heart slow and then accelerate in a peculiar rhythm, as if the pulse of the world had been momentarily rewired. Then he would speak, his voice low and calm, yet it had a strange gravity, a way of pressing itself into the folds of her mind. "Find me," he said, always the same words, soft, unhurried, and impossible to ignore. She would wake before she could reply, gasping, the pillow damp with the sweat of fear she did not fully understand. At first, Mia told herself it was just a dream, a trick of the imagination, a mind unsettled by her restless days and the faint anxiety that seemed to shadow her at every turn. She tried to shake it, focusing on the mundane, the commute, her studies, the routine chatter of friends. But each night, inevitably, he returned. And then, one night, something new happened. The street was darker, fog thicker, almost suffocating. The man did not speak immediately. He simply held out a hand, and in it, as if it had been waiting for her, was a small slip of paper. The writing on it was clear, deliberate, an address. She awoke with the paper burning in her mind, the letters etched into her memory. She could still feel the shape of his hand, the cold weight of his presence lingering like a shadow at the edge of her room. Mia did not sleep well that morning. Her breakfast was untouched, her coffee cooling, forgotten. Her fingers traced the edges of the imaginary paper over and over as she tried to convince herself that it was a dream, that no one could possibly be waiting at that address. But curiosity had taken root alongside fear, and fear, as it often does, sharpened her senses and steered her resolve. By evening, she found herself walking toward the address. The streets outside were quieter than usual, the city breathing slower, almost holding its breath. Streetlights cast elongated shadows across the pavement, turning familiar shapes into something uncanny. She passed closed shops, the orange glow of their security lights flickering against cracked windows, and felt, with every step, that she was moving deeper into a world that had been constructed for her eyes alone. The building she arrived at was a relic. Its brickwork was crumbling, the paint peeling in long vertical strips, and the windows, dark and opaque, reflected the streetlights in distorted, watery shapes. The door was heavy wood, scarred with age, and it opened with a reluctant groan as she pushed. Inside, the air was thick and still. Dust motes drifted in the weak beams of light that fell through cracks in the boarded-up windows. The smell was of old wood, damp plaster, and something metallic, like iron left in the rain. She hesitated in the threshold, her pulse hammering in her ears, feeling the quiet press against her, as if the building itself were aware of her presence. And then she saw him. He was exactly as in her dreams. Coat long, collar up, the mole on his chin precise and deliberate. He stood just beyond the doorway, motionless, the dim light catching the sharp angles of his face. His eyes found hers immediately, and for a heartbeat, Mia felt an unnatural calm settle over her, a quiet she had never known, as if the world itself were holding its breath. "Welcome," he said. The voice was exactly as she remembered, but closer, more immediate. There was no urgency, no threat in it, yet she felt the unspoken weight of intention pressing down. "You came." Mia's legs felt heavy. She wanted to speak, to ask who he was, why he had summoned her, but no words formed. She could only nod, small and uncertain, feeling the air thicken with the unspoken story of this place. This encounter, the man stepped aside slightly, and Mia noticed details she had not seen in her dreams. The way dust swirled faintly at the corners of the floorboards, the subtle smell of something long decayed, the thin thread of light that fell through the cracks in the window. Each small thing seemed magnified, as though she were seeing the apartment through a lens of heightened awareness. "Do you understand now?" he asked. Mia shook her head, her throat tight. He smiled, faint and deliberate, the mole catching the light like a small dark punctuation. "Not yet, but soon. Very soon." A sudden sound startled her, the faint screech of tires outside. She spun toward the window, heart lurching. The street beyond was empty. No car, no lights, no movement. She turned back. The man remained where he was, unmoving, serene. The building seemed to pulse with quiet intention, and Mia realized she had stepped into something that was not just a meeting, but a threshold. "I will wait," he said, almost to himself. "And when the time is right, you will understand." Mia turned and fled. The night was thick around her, shadows pressing close as she ran, the sounds of the city muffled under her pounding heartbeat. She passed familiar streets that now seemed foreign, every lamppost a sentinel, every empty doorway a silent witness. And then, at the corner of the next street, she froze. A vehicle had stopped in the middle of the road. Its headlights were off, but she could feel the presence inside it. It was too still, too heavy to be ordinary. And then she heard it, faint and deliberate, the same soft voice that had followed her through dreams and shadows. "It's all right, little one. We will meet again." Mia's chest tightened, and she ran faster, not daring to look back. Not yet, knowing with a deep, instinctual certainty that some encounters are never meant to be fully understood, in the moment that some shadows follow, until the time is right, and some faces, marked with a mole upon a chin, are destined to return. Mia's feet carried her through streets that seemed to have shifted in her absence, as though the city itself were bending to the rhythm of her fear. She did not pause, did not slow, though her mind raced, folding over itself in quiet panic. The address he had given her burned like a brand behind her eyelids, guiding her steps with a weight she could not shake. Each corner she turned, each empty storefront she passed, made the world feel thinner, stretched toward some inevitable meeting. Her hands gripped the strap of her bag, knuckles white. She was acutely aware of the night air on her skin, sharp and slightly damp, carrying the distant smell of rain lingering on asphalt. The fog had thickened now, curling along the pavements in thin tendrils, wrapping around lampposts, around abandoned bicycles, around the skeletal shapes of trees. Every movement in the fog made her glance over her shoulder. Every sound, the shuffle of a rat, the distant hiss of a car tire on wet road, the faint creak of a sign swinging in the wind, set her pulse to a quicker rhythm. She tried to tell herself it was just a dream, that she would wake up in her own bed, safe, the city familiar. But her legs did not stop. Her instincts pulled her forward, toward the shadowed building whose outline she had memorized in sleep. And as she drew closer, the air felt heavier, like walking through water. Each inhalation tasted faintly metallic, and she realized with a shiver that her heartbeat seemed audible in the still night. The neighborhood was deserted, the usual hum of distant traffic absent. Streetlights flickered intermittently, casting swaths of golden shadow across cracked pavements. And then, as if emerging from the fog itself, the building came into view. It was older than the structures around it, worn and leaning, its windows dark and vacant. Paint peeled like curling bark from the bricks, and the door hung slightly ajar, groaning when touched by a cold wind. Mia hesitated, the instinct to flee wrestling with the pull of curiosity and dread. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. She felt it, the same invisible pressure that had guided her through dreams, a sense that she was crossing a threshold, stepping into a world that had been waiting for her for weeks, for months, for reasons she could not yet comprehend. The air inside smelled of dust and decay, mixed with something sharper, a faint copper tang that pricked the back of her throat. Her footsteps echoed softly across the creaking floorboards. Each sound seemed amplified, each shadow deeper, as if the building itself were listening, waiting, aware of her presence. She moved slowly, deliberately, her senses straining. The faint outline of furniture, overturned and abandoned, appeared in the corners of her vision. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, water-stained and curling. The windows, opaque with grime, let in only thin streaks of silver moonlight that seemed to illuminate paths across the floor, guiding her. And then she saw him. The man with the mole on his chin stood at the end of a hallway, just beyond a broken archway. He was motionless, coat draping long and heavy, collar turned up. His eyes were fixed on her, unblinking, unwavering, and the faint curve of his mouth gave her an unsettling sense of recognition of having known this exact expression in the dreams that had haunted her nights. "You came," he said, voice low, calm, yet filled with a quiet certainty that made the blood in her veins thrum. Mia's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to ask why, to demand answers, but her voice caught. Instead, she felt the pull of the air around him, a subtle gravity that drew her forward despite her fear. The hallway seemed to stretch, elongate, as if bending to accommodate the meeting that had been written into the rhythm of her nights. "Why are you here?" she finally whispered, her words trembling. He did not answer immediately. He only tilted his head, eyes tracing the curve of her figure, the tension in her shoulders, the way her hair caught the moonlight streaming through a cracked window. "Because you were called," he said at last, "and because it is time for you to see." The floorboards groaned beneath her feet as she stepped forward, each movement deliberate, measured, her senses sharpened. She could hear the faint hum of electricity somewhere behind the walls, the scrape of something metal in the distance, the subtle shift of air as it pressed past her. Every detail was heightened, amplified, as though the world had opened a narrow corridor of awareness only for her. Her gaze flicked to the man's face. The mole on his chin was no longer just a mark, it felt like a symbol, a sigil, a silent invitation into a truth she had not yet understood. His eyes held both welcome and warning, a delicate tension that made her skin prickle. "I've been waiting," he said, softer now, almost a whisper, almost carried by the walls themselves. "And now you are here." The words echoed faintly, bounced by the empty hallway, and for a moment Mia felt a strange calm. The fear, though present, was tempered by recognition, by the odd familiarity of this exact encounter she had rehearsed every night in dreams. But then, a subtle sound, too soft to be anything but deliberate, made her heart leap. A low groan of the door behind her, a whisper of movement, as if the building itself were aware of her every step, every breath. She turned, but the hallway was empty, shadows pooling in corners like ink. Her pulse raced. She realized then that she had not crossed into a simple meeting. She had stepped into a web, a space designed, curated, known by him. The man, still at the end of the hall, was not merely waiting. He was watching, measuring, marking, a presence that did not require movement to dominate the room. And then he raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, as if to signal something beyond words. The faint air between them shimmered with anticipation. "Do you see now?" he asked. His voice, though calm, vibrated in the bones, a sound that felt deeper than any spoken word. Mia did not understand. She wanted to flee, to run, to tear herself from the threshold, but the pull of the air, the silent insistence of his gaze, held her rooted. The dream, the call, the unshakable feeling of being summoned all converged into this single moment. Outside, the city slept. Fog lingered along the streets, curling around lampposts and parked cars. Inside, the air was still, heavy with expectancy. Mia knew she had crossed the point from which return was uncertain. She was here, in the space between dream and reality, between fear and curiosity, and the man with the mole on his chin was the axis around which this new reality rotated. He did not speak again immediately. He simply waited, hands at his sides, shoulders relaxed, eyes unblinking. The silence was not empty. It was charged, alive, and the weight of it pressed upon Mia's chest like a soft, insistent hand. "I am here," he said finally, "and now you must decide." Mia felt her legs tremble, her mind stretching to grasp what decision could be required of her in a place that already seemed beyond understanding. But before she could act, before she could even form words, a sudden shift in the air, subtle, almost imperceptible, made her spin toward the entrance. The street outside was quiet. No movement, no light. The fog had thickened, wrapping the world in muted gray. And then she heard it, the faintest echo, almost beneath the edge of hearing, a whisper riding the breeze. "We will meet again," it said, and with that, the man was gone, leaving her in the hushed stillness of the hallway, the weight of anticipation pressing against her. The memory of the mole on his chin burned into her mind. Impossible to forget. Mia staggered outside into the fog, feeling the night press close, cold, and alive, knowing that this encounter was only the beginning. That the streets, the buildings, the silence itself had become part of a larger rhythm, one that she was now entwined with, whether she wished it or not. Mia's legs carried her through the fog-wrapped streets as if they had a will of their own. Each step was measured, slow, yet propelled by a quiet urgency she could not ignore. The city seemed to bend around her, alleys stretching longer, shadows deepening, as though guiding her toward a destination both inevitable and unknowable. Her breath came in shallow rhythms, rising and falling with the pulse of the night. Each inhale brought a faint metallic tang, a reminder of something unseen pressing close. The address led her to a neighborhood abandoned by time. Buildings leaned precariously, their windows dark and lifeless, their brickwork weathered and flaking. The streetlights flickered erratically, throwing brief bursts of dim light onto cracked sidewalks. Piles of leaves swirled in the wind, moving like living things, whispering secrets that Mia could almost understand. She tried to dismiss the thought, but the sense of being observed pressed against her chest, firm and unyielding. Then she saw it, the house. It was smaller than she had imagined, almost hidden between two larger, decaying structures. Its paint was long gone, leaving bare wood scarred by years of wind and rain. The windows, black and opaque, reflected nothing, absorbing the faint streetlight rather than bouncing it back. The door, a heavy slab of wood, seemed to hum faintly with the weight of expectation. Mia paused at the threshold, the fog curling around her ankles like a living thing. Her heart thumped in her ears, loud enough that she was sure the man with the mole would hear it. She raised her hand to the door, felt the cold of the metal handle against her palm, and hesitated. Inside, the air seemed to pulse, charged with anticipation. Every instinct screamed to run, yet every instinct also whispered that she could not turn back now. She pushed the door open, and it groaned, releasing a sound that seemed to echo through the empty street behind her. Inside, the house smelled of dust and damp wood, a faint metallic note lingering in the corners. Shadows pooled along the walls, moving subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if the house itself were alive, breathing, watching. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, each step a tiny announcement of her presence. She moved slowly, methodically, absorbing every detail. The furniture was sparse and old, some pieces overturned, some covered with thin, yellowed sheets. Cobwebs stretched between corners and ceiling beams, swaying gently in a breeze she could not feel. And then she saw him. The man with the mole on his chin stood at the far end of the main room, framed by the doorway of another darkened space. His coat hung heavy and long, collar turned up. He did not move. He did not breathe, or at least Mia could not hear it. He was still, a statue carved from shadow, his mole catching the faintest light from the cracked windows. "You came," he said, voice calm, low, measured. It carried a weight, a certainty that pressed against her mind and bones. Mia swallowed, trying to form words, but her throat was dry. Her lips moved, whispering nothing. The fog of fear and anticipation clung to her, thick and tangible, and yet she felt an odd pull forward, drawn toward him by something ancient, inexorable. He stepped aside slightly, gesturing with a hand she could barely see in the dim light. "Come in," he said. "You are where you are meant to be." Every instinct screamed to stop, to retreat, to turn her back and run into the fog outside. But she could not. The house seemed to have claimed her steps, guiding her toward a truth she did not yet comprehend. She crossed the threshold into the main room, feeling the air thicken, charged with quiet energy, as if every shadow, every crack in the floorboards, every beam of moonlight were aligned to a purpose. Mia's eyes scanned the room. Dust motes drifted lazily in the beams of light. The walls, stripped of wallpaper, were raw and cold, bearing the scars of time and neglect. Yet beyond the decay, she sensed intention, a meticulous placement of absence, a deliberate shaping of the space that held her now. He did not move, only waited. And in the waiting, she felt a strange calm. It was not peace. It was not safety. It was understanding, or the illusion of it, that she had entered something larger than herself. Something older than the city, older than the street, older than any rational explanation she could muster. "You have seen me before," he said softly. "In dreams, in the quiet hours when the world is still. You have followed the call, and now you are here." Mia nodded, though her lips did not form a sound. Her pulse was a drum in her ears, her skin prickling, the fog of fear still wrapped around her like a second skin. She had followed, she had come, and now she was caught in a space that was neither dream nor waking, a liminal place where the ordinary laws of understanding no longer applied. The man did not step closer. He did not need to. The presence of him was enough. The mole on his chin seemed to anchor the air itself, drawing the room into his orbit. And yet, there was a softness in the way he looked at her, a patience, a careful expectation that stretched the moments thin, as if time itself had slowed to accommodate this encounter. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, fog curling around the house like a living thing, and somewhere distant, the faint whisper of a street lamp swaying in the wind. Mia felt a chill, a cold creeping along her spine, not from temperature, but from understanding. She had crossed a threshold from which there was no simple return. "You will understand soon," he said, voice almost a breath. "The time will come. Patience, little one." And then he was gone, as if the shadows themselves had swallowed him, leaving Mia in the still, silent house, the weight of anticipation pressing down, every sense sharpened, every breath measured. She stepped back toward the door, fog pressing against her, night pressing in, carrying the echo of his voice and the promise of a return. She did not run. She could not. She simply stood there, feeling the lingering presence of someone who had already walked in her dreams and would walk again in her waking hours. And so Mia left the house, stepping back into the fog, carrying with her the memory of the mole on his chin and the echo of words she could not yet understand, knowing that the streets, the night, and the shadows themselves had shifted, waiting for the next meeting, the next call, the next dream. Mia walked on through the fog, the street under her feet slick and uneven. Each step seemed heavier than the last, yet impossible to stop. Her mind churned with fragments of dreams, fragments of encounters that felt both familiar and alien. The mole, the chin, the voice all pressed against the edges of her thoughts, demanding attention, refusing to be ignored. The city had become a maze of shadows. Streetlights flickered intermittently, painting the world in brief flashes of amber and gray. The fog wrapped around her, curling at her ankles, seeping into the folds of her coat, carrying the scent of damp concrete and cold iron. Every familiar corner had been transformed, elongated, twisted by memory and expectation. She knew the city, and yet, in this haze, it was unrecognizable. Her footsteps slowed as she approached a narrow alley she had never noticed before. The edges of the buildings leaned closer together, the windows staring down at her like dark, watchful eyes. She felt a pull toward the alley, subtle but insistent, as if it were another extension of the call she had followed in her dreams. Mia stepped in. The air here was colder, heavier, almost viscous. She could hear faint dripping, the soft echo of water hitting a metal grate somewhere unseen. Shadows moved just at the edge of vision, and her heart beat faster. Someone was waiting at the end of this passage. Then she saw the door. Small, old, almost invisible in the darkness, yet unmistakable. It was as if it had been waiting for her, hidden in plain sight until she was ready. The wood was weathered, the paint long flaked away, and the handle was cold to the touch, sending a shiver up her arm. She hesitated, breath shallow, fingers hovering over the knob, and yet she could not turn back. Not now. Inside, the room smelled of dust and old wood, with a faint metallic tang that made her stomach twist. It was sparsely furnished, empty but for a single chair and a small table. Light spilled faintly through cracks in the boarded windows, casting long, fragile beams across the floor. The room seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting subtly, alive with a presence that pressed gently against her senses. He was there, the man from her dreams, the one with the mole on his chin, stood by the table, his coat draped long and heavy, collar turned up. His eyes, steady and unblinking, watched her approach. The faint curve of his lips was both familiar and disquieting. "You came," he said, voice calm, resonant, and somehow both near and distant at once. "You followed the call." Mia nodded, unable to form words. Her throat felt dry, her legs weak. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier, every shadow sharpened. She felt as if the space itself had contracted to contain only the two of them. The ambient world compressed, muted, leaving only the hum of her heartbeat and the gravity of his presence. He gestured toward the chair. "Sit," he said. "It is time you understand." Her legs obeyed before her mind could argue. She lowered herself slowly, every movement deliberate, aware of the floor beneath her, the air around her, the faint creak of the chair. The room seemed suspended, caught in a delicate balance between stillness and expectation. "I have been waiting for you," he said. "Not in the waking world, not in ordinary time, but in the spaces between. In the quiet hours when dreams stretch and bend, when the mind is open to what lies beyond. You have followed the threads, you have listened, and now, you are here." Mia's gaze flicked to him, then to the table. She felt the pull of understanding, tantalizingly close yet just beyond reach. She had seen him in dreams, had heard the voice, had followed the call through fog and city streets, but she did not yet comprehend what she was meant to see, what truth awaited. He leaned slightly forward, eyes intense. Some things are not meant to be discovered in haste. Some doors open only when you are ready to walk through them. Her chest tightened, a mixture of fear and anticipation. She felt the weight of her own curiosity pressing against her ribs. Every instinct urged caution, yet every instinct also urged forward, toward revelation, toward knowing. And then he spoke again, softer this time, almost a whisper carried by the room itself. "Look closely. Do not avert your gaze." Mia's eyes followed his hand as it pointed toward a small mirror on the wall. She had not noticed it before. Its surface was cloudy with age, streaked with dust and faint scratches, yet it reflected more than just her own image. In the mirror, she saw herself, but not entirely. Behind her, faint, almost imperceptible, was the shadow of the man, his mole catching the faint light, eyes fixed upon her. She turned, heart racing, but the space behind her was empty. The reflection lingered, showing him patient, still, a presence tied to her gaze and her attention. Her pulse quickened. She could feel a coldness spreading from her chest, seeping outward, touching her fingers and toes. She wanted to run, yet the room, the mirror, the man they held her, suspended in a delicate tension between understanding and dread. "You see now," he said. "You are part of the thread, part of the weaving. Every dream, every whisper, every step through fog has led to this moment, and yet you have only glimpsed the surface." Mia's mind spun, trying to reconcile what she saw with what she had known. The dreams, the call, the persistent presence. It was all a map, a signal, a guide to this place. And still, the deeper meaning remained just out of reach. A truth she could feel but not yet name. He stepped closer, not threatening, not abrupt, but with the inevitability of tide meeting shore. The mole marks the way, the chin holds the key. You are here to follow, to witness, to remember, but understanding comes slowly, over time, in layers, like the folding of a shadow into the night. Mia could only nod, trembling slightly. The room seemed to pulse with quiet energy, a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. She felt simultaneously exposed and protected, afraid and calm, tethered to something beyond comprehension, yet intimately connected to it. He spoke once more, voice barely above a whisper. "Soon, the path will reveal itself. Until then, remember the face, the mole, and the quiet of the night. The rest will come." And then he was gone. The room, once charged with his presence, felt empty, hollowed, yet alive with the residue of expectation. The fog outside pressed against the windows, curling like smoke. Mia stood, breath shallow, heart racing, and stepped toward the door, carrying the echo of the encounter with her. Outside, the street was empty, fog thick and heavy, the night deep with possibility. She walked slowly, each step measured, aware that what she had seen and felt would linger in her mind, a seed waiting to grow, a shadow following her into sleep. And in the stillness of the city, in the quiet hours before dawn, Mia knew that the mole on the chin, the face she could never forget, and the voice that had called her, would return. Mia moved through the fog-drenched streets with the memory of the man with the mole on her chin etched into every nerve. Her steps were slow, measured, as though the world itself had expanded and contracted with each footfall. The streetlights flickered above her, casting pale, uneven pools of light that stretched like elongated fingers across the cracked pavement. Shadows pooled in corners, and the wind carried faint whispers, indistinct but oddly insistent, curling around her ears and brushing her hair. She followed the memory of the address he had given her, guided less by maps than by the quiet pull that had begun in her dreams. Each step seemed familiar, though she knew she had never been here in waking life. The fog thickened around her, coiling at her ankles and rising to curl around her shoulders. It moved like water, shaping itself to the contours of the streets, pressing close but never touching, always keeping her aware of its presence. When she reached the alley, narrow and crooked, the walls on either side seemed taller than before, leaning in toward each other, dark windows like watchful eyes. She hesitated, aware of the way her pulse had quickened, aware of the quiet, subtle vibrations in the air that told her she was being observed. Yet she pressed forward, each step deliberate, carrying her toward the inevitable confrontation. The house loomed ahead, smaller than she expected, yet monumental in its effect. Its door, aged and weathered, seemed to breathe in rhythm with her own heart, swollen with anticipation, creaking slightly in the wind. The building smelled of damp wood and decay, yet beneath that faint rot was the lingering metallic tang she had felt before, the sense that something unseen, something patient, waited just inside. Mia pushed the door open, the hinges groaning a low, resonant warning. Inside, the house was dim, moonlight spilling in through the broken windows and catching the dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. The room pulsed with quiet energy, a weight pressing against her chest, drawing her toward the figure she already knew would be there. He stood as he had before, motionless, coat draping heavy over his frame, collar turned up. His eyes held hers, steady, unwavering, and the faint curve of his lips gave her an unsettling sense of recognition, as though she had known this smile all her life. The mole on his chin caught the pale light, a marker, a sigil, something she could not name but felt in her bones. "You came," he said, voice calm, a low vibration that seemed to resonate through the floor beneath her. "You have come to understand." Mia's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to ask why, to demand answers, but no words came. Her voice felt trapped in her chest, a fragile bird struggling to fly. She could only nod, her hands clutching at the strap of her bag as though it tethered her to reality. He gestured subtly toward the room, his presence folding the space around her, making shadows deeper, the air thicker. "Look," he said, "see what has been waiting for you." Her gaze fell upon a mirror, small, old, and clouded with age. The reflection was familiar yet unfamiliar, capturing not only her image but something beyond a faint shadow, a movement behind her that did not exist in the room itself. She turned instinctively, heart hammering, but there was nothing. And yet, in the mirror, the shadow remained, fixed, patient, watching. The man stepped closer, slow, deliberate, every movement controlled. He did not raise his voice, did not gesture dramatically. The calm certainty of his presence was enough to command the room. "You have followed the path," he said softly. "Every dream, every whisper, every step has led you here, and now you see what you were meant to see." Mia's mind raced. The encounters in her dreams, the calls in the fog, the faint pull that had guided her, all of it coalesced here, into this one space, this one moment. She felt the air tighten around her, as if the room itself were drawing breath in time with hers. The walls seemed to lean closer, the shadows pooling in corners, waiting, observing. A low hum seemed to vibrate beneath the floorboards, resonating with her own heartbeat. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it threaded through her body, weaving a tense, quiet energy that made her skin prickle. She realized with a shiver that the house itself was part of this alive, patient, and deeply aware of her presence. "Do you understand?" he asked, voice soft but insistent. "The mole, the chin, the call in the night, all are threads, and you have woven yourself into them. There is no turning back now." Her lips parted, but only a whisper emerged. I think I understand." He shook his head gently, almost imperceptibly. "You only see the surface. There is more. There will always be more. The path is endless, and yet it begins here, with a choice. Mia's chest tightened further. The fog, the city streets, the house, the mirror, the man, all of it pressed in. A delicate balance of fear and curiosity. A rhythm she could not resist. Her mind reeled, trying to grasp the immensity of what she was entangled in. Yet some quiet, patient part of her knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The man stepped aside slightly, his eyes fixed on hers. "Follow or step back," he said. "But know this, the path does not end, and the mole marks the way, always." Mia felt a surge of motion behind her, subtle, almost imperceptible, and she turned slowly, sensing a presence that was not in the room yet, somehow tangible. Her heart thumped violently, yet her body remained rooted, drawn to the quiet inevitability of the confrontation. She took a step forward, then another, each one deliberate, each one folding her deeper into the strange rhythm of the night, the house, and the presence of the man. She felt the fog press against her once more, outside the walls, as if the world had narrowed to this single moment, this single choice. And then he spoke again, softer now, a whisper that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of her bones. "Soon, all will be revealed. But for now, remember this feeling, this quiet certainty, this tether to what is unseen. You are ready, and yet, you are only beginning." Mia exhaled, a long, slow breath, feeling the weight of the encounter settle over her, gentle yet insistent. The mirror reflected nothing now except her own face, pale and trembling, and yet she knew the shadow would return. The mole on his chin, the call, the fog, the quiet pull, all of it was still there, waiting, patient, inevitable. She stepped back toward the door, each movement slow, measured, carrying the echo of the confrontation within her. Outside, the fog clung to the streets like a living thing, the night quiet except for the faint whisper of wind and the distant drip of water. She felt both the weight and the release of what had happened, knowing that she had crossed a threshold, stepped into a world that would continue to call her, to guide her, to haunt her dreams and her waking hours alike. Mia walked on, carrying the encounter in her mind, the shadow of the mole, the call that had brought her here, and the quiet knowledge that the path would continue, winding through dreams and fog, through night and waking, until the next meeting. Mia's steps were muffled by the thick blanket of fog that wrapped itself around the streets, curling at her ankles and rising to obscure the dim glow of street lamps. The city had transformed into a liminal space, familiar yet impossibly strange, every corner and alleyway appearing stretched, elongated, waiting. She moved with cautious certainty, guided by the memory of the man with the mole on his chin, his words echoing softly in her mind, almost like a lullaby. The path does not end. The mole marks the way. The fog seemed alive, coiling and twisting around her, carrying whispers just beyond comprehension. She thought she heard footsteps behind her, slow, measured, but whenever she turned, there was nothing. Still, the sense of being observed pressed against her, subtle yet insistent, a delicate weight she could not ignore. Ahead, the faint outline of another house emerged from the mist, smaller than the last, with boarded windows and a door that sagged slightly on its hinges. It seemed to wait, patient, as if it had known she would come. Mia approached cautiously, aware of each creak beneath her boots, each heartbeat echoing in her ears. She reached for the doorknob, cold and unyielding, and pushed it open. Inside, the house was hushed, almost reverent, as if holding its breath. Dust swirled lazily in the slivers of light that spilled through the gaps in the boarded windows. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and old paper, the remnants of lives long gone. Shadows pooled in corners, moving subtly, as though the room itself were alive, reacting to her presence. He was there, the man with the mole on his chin, standing silently in the far corner. His coat hung heavy and still, collar turned up, eyes steady and unwavering. He made no move, yet his presence seemed to fill the entire room, pressing against her senses, anchoring the fog outside, the shadows within. "You have followed the path faithfully," he said softly, voice low, resonant. "You have walked through fog and night, through dreams and echoes, and yet the final understanding has not yet arrived." Mia's lips parted slightly, a whisper of a breath escaping. I, I don't know what to do, she murmured. Her voice sounded fragile, almost lost, yet he heard her clearly. You do not need to know yet, he replied. The path unfolds slowly. You are in the place between knowing and not knowing, between fear and curiosity. That is where the truth waits. Her eyes were drawn to a small mirror on a table. She approached it, hesitant, and gazed into the surface. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and wide-eyed. And yet, behind her in the mirror, a shadow moved subtle, impossible, tethered to her gaze but not to the room itself. She spun around, heart hammering, but the room remained empty. Only the mirror held the secret of the other presence. Patient, watching, waiting. The man stepped closer, slow, deliberate. Each movement was measured, controlled, a rhythm that seemed to echo in the fog outside, in the distant, dripping water, in her own heartbeat. You see now, he said, that not all is as it appears. The mole is a marker, a guide. The chin, the call, the dream all are invitations. You have accepted them, and yet, you have only glimpsed the surface. Mia shivered, a cold creeping along her spine, but it was not entirely unpleasant. It was a recognition, a tether to something larger than herself, something ancient and inevitable. Her legs were rooted, her breath slow and steady, her mind alert, yet calm. You will follow further, he continued. The next step will be revealed soon. But remember, the path is endless and patient. There is no rushing it, no forcing understanding. You are here to witness, to remember, to be present. That is enough for now. She nodded slowly, absorbing his words, feeling the weight of their meaning press gently against her mind. Every instinct urged her to speak, to demand clarity, but she realized that this was not the time. This was the space between fear and knowledge, the liminal zone where revelation lived quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment. Outside, the fog thickened, curling and shifting, swallowing the outlines of buildings and alleys, turning the world into a soft, muted gray. Mia stepped back toward the door, each movement deliberate, aware of the floor beneath her, the air around her, the quiet hum of anticipation that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. She opened the door and stepped out, the chill of the fog immediately wrapping around her like a shroud. The street seemed longer now, stretching out infinitely, but she walked with a measured calm, each step in rhythm with her breath, each heartbeat a quiet drum guiding her forward. The man's voice, soft and distant, echoed in her mind as she moved through the fog. The path does not end. The mole marks the way. Patience, little one. All will be revealed in time. And as she walked, the city seemed to fold around her, the fog whispering in quiet tongues, the shadows shifting in anticipation, carrying her gently but insistently toward the next moment, the next revelation, the next step on a path that would never truly end. Mia moved through the fog-drenched streets, each step measured, slow, almost ritualistic, as though the rhythm of her movement could anchor her in the strange, stretching reality around her. The city had become a quiet, empty world, muted and softened by the thick mist that clung to every surface. Streetlights glimmered like distant stars through the haze, casting a faint glow on puddles that reflected the pale light back up into the fog, turning the streets into a shifting silver river. She clutched the folded piece of paper tightly in her hand, the address the man with the mole had given her. It had felt alive in her grasp, warmed by her palm, as if it contained a heartbeat of its own. Each step toward the location was accompanied by the faint echo of her own pulse, a low drum of expectation and unease that pressed against the fog and whispered in the spaces between. The street ended abruptly at a rusted iron gate, half open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Beyond it lay a small courtyard, overgrown with weeds, littered with fragments of broken tiles and cracked stone. The house at the center was decrepit, its roof sagging, windows boarded haphazardly, yet it exuded a quiet invitation, a patient presence that seemed to recognize her arrival. Mia paused, breath shallow, feeling the weight of anticipation settle into her chest. The fog pressed against her face, damp and cool, curling around her hair and coat like a living thing. The faint sound of dripping water echoed somewhere beyond the gate, a rhythm she had come to recognize as part of this place, part of the path that had drawn her here. With careful steps, she approached the front door. It was slightly ajar, the wood worn smooth by time and touch. The air inside smelled faintly of damp paper, old wood, and something metallic, almost imperceptible, a scent that made her stomach tighten with both fear and familiarity. And there he was. The man with the mole on his chin stood just beyond the doorway, framed by the dim light that filtered through the cracked windows. His coat hung heavily from his shoulders, collar turned up, eyes steady and unblinking. He smiled faintly, a curve that was both welcoming and unsettling, as though he knew the contours of her thoughts, the rhythm of her fears, the depth of her curiosity. "Welcome," he said, voice low, smooth, carrying the weight of inevitability. "You have followed the path to its threshold. You have walked through fog, through dreams, through whispers, and now you are here." Mia's knees felt weak. She wanted to speak, to ask the questions that pressed at the edges of her mind, but no words came, only a tremor in her hands, gripping the paper like a lifeline, and a shallow, irregular rhythm of breath that seemed to synchronize with the pulsing of the fog outside. He gestured toward the threshold of the house. "Step inside," he said. "All will be revealed, but only if you are ready to witness." With a deep breath, Mia crossed the doorway. The air inside was cool, dense, charged with the quiet hum of something unnameable. Dust motes floated lazily in the shafts of dim light, catching the shimmer of her presence, reflecting it back in tiny sparks of silver. The house seemed alive, waiting, breathing, aware of each movement, each thought, each heartbeat that she carried into its space. He guided her forward without touch, his presence enough to anchor her steps. "Do you understand now?" he asked, voice soft, resonant. "The mole marks the way. The chin carries the signal. Every dream, every whisper, every step you have taken has been part of the path." Mia nodded, the understanding settling slowly over her, like a tide creeping across the shore. It was not clarity, not complete revelation, but a deep, patient knowing, the sense that she had arrived where she needed to be, that the path had unfolded exactly as it should. The man stepped aside, revealing a narrow passageway that led to a small room, illuminated by a single, flickering lantern. The shadows danced along the walls, stretching and folding in ways that made the room feel larger than its physical dimensions. At the center, a small mirror rested on a table, its surface gleaming faintly in the lantern light. Mia approached, breath shallow, and gazed into the mirror. Her reflection stared back, pale, wide-eyed, yet not alone. Behind her in the glass, faint and barely discernible, was the shadow of the man, his mole catching the light. He did not move in the room itself, only in the mirror tethered to her gaze, a guardian of the threshold, a reminder of the path she had followed. "You see," he said softly, almost reverently, "all that you have encountered was part of this. The fog, the dreams, the whispers, the call in the night, they have guided you here, to this place between knowing and not knowing. And now, you have arrived." Mia's heartbeat slowed, the rhythm of the night and the fog in the house settling into a quiet sync with her own. She felt a strange calm, as if the tension that had clung to her since the first dream had softened, leaving her tethered to this place, to this moment, aware of the continuity of the path, of the patient guidance of the man with the mole. He stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. "You will leave now. Return to the world outside. But remember what you have seen, what you have felt. The mole, the chin, the call, they will remain with you. And the path will always be here, waiting, patient, infinite." Mia turned slowly, stepping toward the door. The fog outside had not lifted, yet it seemed less threatening, less unknowable. The city stretched out before her like a quiet, sleeping expanse, each street a continuation of the path she had walked, each shadow a gentle reminder of the journey she had undertaken. As she stepped into the night, she felt the soft, insistent whisper of wind in her ears, carrying a voice she had come to know intimately. "We will meet again. The path continues, always, and the mole marks the way." A long, slow breath escaped her lips. She walked into the fog, each step deliberate, each heartbeat a quiet drum, the memory of the man with the mole, the dreams, and the whispers settling deep within her, patient and enduring. And somewhere in the distance, in the quiet spaces between the fog and the night, the faintest echo of a smile lingered, as if the city itself, the path, and the dream had watched her cross the threshold into understanding, into presence, into the gentle acceptance of a journey that never truly ends. And now, our 7 tales have drawn to a close, but the night does not end here. Shadows linger, whispers remain, and somewhere, beyond the reach of light, the stories continue, patiently, quietly, waiting. If you listen closely, perhaps you will hear them too, in the soft rustle of the wind, in the faint drip of rain, or in the quiet echo of your own heartbeat. Sleep well, but remember, the night is always watching, always listening, and it has its own stories to tell, long after we close our eyes.